Council is now leader of the City Hall Greens.
Woohoo!
The Assembly has had a busy month with the publication of reports. The Health Committee commissioned a survey and discovered that younger Londoners over-rely on ambulances because they can't access other services. We published our annual report detailing all the work we've done to hold the Mayor to account on behalf of Londoners. This year, emojis featured heavily.
Oh.
Somebody else has written this for me. I've got no idea what that means. We surveyed Londoners about their attitudes to advertising on the TfL network, and we asked questions about the delays to Crossrail to get to the bottom of who knew when about the delay. We also made our thoughts known on the financial embarrassment surrounding the London Stadium and the plague of plastic that infects our parks and rivers, calling on the Mayor to sign up to the Plastics Pact. The Assembly cross-examined housing associations and asked whether they were still fit for purpose. We discussed the resourcing arrangement for the Mayor's Violent Crime Task Force with the Met and MOPAC. We held meetings on the future of the taxi and private hire industry, expansion of Heathrow, building more housing in Outer London, and the London Fire Brigade, and the Environment Committee had a visit from a squirrel. Can I ask the Assembly, please, to note the recommendation set out on item 2, asking whether or not you have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests whether they relate to the items on today's agenda. No? Thank you very much. Minutes. Can I ask the Assembly, please, to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meetings held on the 3rd of September 2018 and the 6th of September 2018, as well as Mayor's question time held on the 13th of September. Okay, would you agree I can sign these? Thanks very much. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period 31st of August 2018 to the 4th of October 2018?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I have a statement relating, please, to the mayoral elections. Unusually for the first time, 2 members of the Assembly are likely to be the major candidates in the election. There may well be others who will be standing, and I really want to set down the rules of engagement, if I may. All of the campaigns will be run outside of this building. Inside City Hall, however, there are clear, robust rules to prevent the Mayor and any member from using GLA resources for party political reasons, but also to allow them to act as elected office holders on behalf of Londoners. The Mayor and Assembly Member Bailey are both absolutely required and entitled to continue to discharge the duties that come with holding these offices. Therefore, you, Assembly Member Bailey, can continue to hold the Mayor to account, including by asking the Mayor questions at Mayor's question time about any matter for which the Mayor has responsibility, as is normal and in accordance with our published rules. And you, Mr. Mayor, are entitled and indeed required to respond. As Chairman, I have responsibility for regulating the conduct of these meetings, and officers are here to advise me on those issues, and I will intervene where I consider it necessary. However, I am asking both candidates to ensure that proper GLA business is dealt with in GLA meetings, and that issues relating to the mayoral campaign are dealt with as part of the mayoral campaign. I don't want to have to keep intervening. If there are any concerns, I would ask that these be raised with me informally. I hope that all of us in this chamber can agree that the focus of Mayor's question time should remain on holding the Mayor to account, and the reputation of this authority and politics in London generally will not be served by using our time to deal with procedural challenges and points of order. I want us to have effective Assembly meetings, and I don't want there to be any abuse of process whilst we are in these meetings. And I hope that members of the Assembly who are not candidates will support me in holding the candidates to account. Thank you very much. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Assembly members have submitted one request for topics for inclusion within this update. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Yesterday at Sadiq Cathedral, I joined over 1,000 others, including Assembly members here today, to celebrate the life of Dame Tessa Jowell, who sadly passed away earlier this year. Tessa was one of the most respected politicians in the country, someone full of kindness and generosity, and is sorely missed by family, friends and everyone who knew her. Tessa did more than anybody to bring the 2012 Olympic Games to London, and their spectacular success was a testament to her expertise, passion and energy. I was therefore pleased to announce that one of the most popular walkways in the Olympic Park is being renamed in her memory. This morning I wrote to you, Chairman, to inform you that following a successful 2 years as Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement, Matthew Ryder QC has decided to step down in order to return to his legal career. I'm grateful to Matthew for forging strong relationships across London's diverse communities and the key role he played in developing our groundbreaking strategy to address social integration in London. I'm delighted to announce that Dr. Debbie Weeks-Bernard has been appointed to succeed Matthew. Debbie is an expert on poverty and ethnicity, education and labour markets, and joins my team from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I know she'll do a great job in bringing together our diverse communities and ensuring that all Londoners feel a key part of our city. Since we last met, Chair, I continue to stand up for our city as Mayor and to work on a number of new initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. These include establishing a new violence reduction unit of specialists in health, police and local government to lead and deliver a long-term public health approach to tackling the causes of violent crime. Continuing to work with the Violent Crime Task Force funded by City Hall to crack down on violent crime across the city, providing funding to 36 projects that are delivering activities for young Londoners, including those most at risk of getting caught up in crime, launching a new programme to tackle health inequalities, and stepping up London's preparations in case of a catastrophic no-deal Brexit. Tomorrow, people from every corner of our country will travel to London to demand that the British people get the final say on Brexit. The government is taking us towards either a bad Brexit deal or, worse still, no deal at all. Both these scenarios are a million miles from what was promised. People didn't vote to make themselves poorer, to damage our NHS or to put jobs at risk. As Mayor of London, I'm proud to welcome everyone joining the March for the Future, and will be marching and speaking at the rally to add my voice to the calls for a public vote with the option of remaining in the EU. I look forward to answering your questions today. I've also been asked, as you said, Chair, to give an oral update on Scotland Yard and pro-leave groups. I understand concerns regarding news reports that Scotland Yard were citing political sensitivities as the reason why potential criminality linked to pro-leave groups was not being investigated. Decisions about how the Metropolitan Police investigate allegations are operational, and I can't interfere in the day-to-day decisions of matters of this nature. However, my office have been informed by the Met that the news report is inaccurate. The Electoral Commission has made 2 referrals to the Met Police Service in relation to the EU referendum. The first referral was received on the 11th of May 2018 and concerns leave.eu. The second referral was received on the 17th of July 2018 and concerns Vote Leave and Be Leave. In relation to both referrals, the relevant documentary evidence from the Electoral Commission was only received on the 7th of September 2018 when the Met was provided with over 2,000 documents. These documents are being assessed by specialist investigators, supported with advice from the Crown Prosecution Service in order to make an informed decision as to whether a criminal investigation is required. For clarity, the Met have stressed that the status of their inquiries is not due to political sensitivities, but due to the amount of evidential material that needs to be considered. As with previous referrals from the Electoral Commission, the Metropolitan Police Service will make public the outcome of their assessment.
Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much, much for answering that extra question, Mr Mayor. Can I just clarify, have you spoken with the Commissioner about the delays in this case and to get that new information? And if not, do you plan to?
My office has spoken to the Met Police Service. I haven't spoken to the Commissioner. And the explanation for the inquiries is because the documents were received literally just about a month ago. There are more than 2,000 documents, and you'll appreciate that Met Police has got to consider them.
Yeah, and have you asked the Commissioner why those statements were made to the press about political sensitivities?
I understand a press officer spoke to the media, but I can't comment on what the press officer said to the media.
Okay, you've not discussed that with the Commissioner?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. And just quickly to the Mayor and his statement about Deputy Mayor Matthew Ryder leaving us. I have had the pleasure of working very closely with him, both in my role as lead in many of the areas he covers for my group, and also, as you know, as someone who has had a passion on these areas for the last 40 or 50 years. And I would just like to say to the Deputy, through you, Mr Mayor, that on Monday night here at the event that I took part with on behalf of the Assembly, and that was the London Team London Awards, that was an example of this journey that we have been on under your administration and Matthew's leadership, where Londoners, old and young, black and white, Asian, I mean, it was an absolute replication of London, gay and straight, you name it. My heart went out to a 14-year-old young woman who is in transition, and I haven't got the language right yet, but she's standing up for her rights to be transsexual. And it was a joy. That could not have happened without the integrity, without the professionalism, and I have to say style that Mr Ryder has in terms of getting the thing together and making it look part of us to a standard that I do hope and I wish that Debbie, their new appointment, will be able to pick up and run with. It's been a joy working with him, and we've got all the amazing strategies that we've all been working hard to look at. So certainly from me, and I think for everybody else who's worked with him, we wish him all the best where he goes back to his home in the legal.
Well, Chair, can I say through you, I'll pass on to Matthew Ryder the comments of Assembly Member Arnold. She's right to remind me, as I said earlier, that he was the first Deputy Mayor for social integration, social mobility and community engagement. It's had a huge amount of work. The strategies you've talked about are also a legacy of the work he's done, but I'm sure Debbie will build on Matthew's work and will have an even closer relationship with you and others on the Assembly who champion diversity and don't see it as a weakness, but see it as a strength. And I'll be looking towards Debbie in the course of the next 18 months, when some may try and divide us, to keep us united and keep us together.
Okay. Thank you very much. We now move to the questions which are set out on the priority order paper. And the first question is London's Brexit preparations, in the name of Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you, Chair. The government's botched operation to the Brexit negotiations means that crashing out of the EU with no deal at all looks more likely than ever. Even the French government is more prepared than the British government for a no-deal scenario, having published their no-deal bill earlier this week. That's why several months ago I instructed my officials to step up our preparations for a no-deal Brexit. I asked the London Resilience Forum, the partnership responsible for ensuring London's preparedness in the event of emergencies, to establish the impact of a no-deal Brexit on a number of critical areas. The Resilience Forum's work to date has indicated that there's been a lack of information from the government to inform local planners and individual organisations of the expected outcomes of a no-deal Brexit. This, coupled with either commercial or security sensitivities on some of the key issues such as food, fuel, energy and essential medicine supplies, has severely constrained the ability of any local level resilience planning. I've also launched a survey of London's business community to determine whether businesses have started to take the necessary steps to prepare for Brexit and whether the advice and support being provided was adequate. The survey is only recently closed, but what was clear from the responses is that businesses feel they've not had sufficient guidance from the government. In response, I've launched a Brexit business portal on the London Growth Hub to help businesses navigate the information and access the support available to them. I'll be raising these issues directly with the government, but it's obvious that we remain completely unprepared for a no-deal Brexit. And this is one of the reasons why I've called for a public vote. The Prime Minister clearly doesn't have the mandate to gamble so flagrantly with the future of the British economy and people's livelihoods. The reality is the abject failure of the government and the huge risk we now face of either a bad deal or a no-deal Brexit means that giving people a fresh say on our future is now the right and only approach left for the good of our country.
Thank you, Mayor. So in essence, even though we're having difficulty getting out of information out of HM government about some of their scenario planning and resilience planning, we're going ahead in London and starting to prepare on what information we've got. So you essentially agree with a Conservative-led government. The reason why I ask this is we've got members in this chamber who don't believe with the Tory-led government in preparing for resilience planning for a no-deal Brexit. Is that your position? You think they're right to do it? It's not shroud waving. It's not talking London down, as others have said. It's about actually preparing for all events that we may face, and particularly in terms of no deal.
I think it's very prudent, and I support the government's need to prepare for the possibility of no deal. I query and criticise how much they've done. The technical notes they've prepared are inadequate, but there is a possibility, Assembly Member Duval, we have no deal with no transition period, and we'll literally fall off a cliff edge at the end of March. The idea that in the interest or because of some sort of blind patriotism or blind jingoism, we don't prepare for that, I think is reckless. As it is, a no deal will be catastrophic. No deal without any preparation is not even worth thinking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member O'Connell and relates to Blackhorse Lane Bridge. And please note that the question should refer to a completion date of 2020, not 2022.
I didn't.
No,
It went up a
can
bit
you make
late.
yourself more obvious?
I will, Chair. I will, Chair.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Well, thank you. This is a supplementary question to Assembly Member Duval. I'm particularly concerned by the impact of no deal on medical supplies. The government has said that the NHS should stockpile for 6 weeks of medicines. What guarantees have you, or what assurances have you had that we are prepared to do that, or we are in a position to be able to do that by the exit date?
Well, we are talking, as part of the London Resilience Forum that Fiona Twycross is chairing and working on, we're speaking to the NHS and others about how much medicines they have. You'll be aware, Dr. Sahota, that a considerable amount of our medicines are imported from the EU. And one of the concerns, obviously, the NHS and others have is if there is a catastrophic no deal or without transition, is there a need to stockpile extra medical supplies? And you'll also be aware some of these medical supplies need to be refrigerated and have a certain temperature. The government's told the NHS to stockpile 6 weeks worth of extra medical supplies. I'm really concerned about our access to medicines should there be the possibility, should there be the reality, I beg your pardon, of what is a distinct possibility of no deal without transition. The officials are working, our officials are working with government officials, and Dr. Fiona Twycross and others will make sure that we're as prepared as we can be.
Yeah, of course, as you say, that we import something like 37 million packets of medicines every week, so every month rather, from the European Union. But on top of that, our medicines produced in this country won't be recognised in Europe. And that's another problem for our manufacturers. They won't be able to export their medicines into Europe, and that's another problem which we will face.
Well, no one talked about this campaigning to leave the EU 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. It was going to be the land of milk and honey, should the British public vote to leave the EU. This is not what we promised. And you'll be aware the European Medicines Agency is now leaving London as well, yes, going to Amsterdam, taking at least 900 jobs with them. That has an impact on our medicine economy, but also you're right, the regulations mean if we're going to have a frictionless trade with the EU, we've got to abide by the regulations, not unreasonably, that the EU have. And so the idea that we will have divergence is very worrying when it comes to export of medicine. We should have an alignment, which would mean the possibility of us being able to export our medicines to the EU, really important for jobs, wealth, but also the cross-fertilisation of experts in our country working with experts in the EU has led to the innovation of, as you all know, many advances in medicine and medicines.
Great, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. And now, Assembly Member O'Connell's question on Blackhorse Lane Bridge.
Thank you, Chair. It is essential that the Blackhorse Lane Bridge and the neighbouring Croydon Council-owned Addiscombe Railway Park Bridge are replaced. These bridges are over 100 years old and were inherited by TfL from Network Rail in 2013. TfL have since done all they can to make sure these bridges were maintained. However, these bridges are nearly 130 years old and at the end of their design life. Replacing them is the only option. TfL is working closely with Croydon Council and Sarah Jones MP to coordinate this vital safety work as quickly as possible to ensure that the bridges can safely accommodate tram and road traffic, not just for the immediate future, but for the next 100 plus years. Options to strengthen the existing bridges were considered, but this will still have caused significant disruption and would not be cost efficient, as they would still need to be replaced later on. The improvements will include widening one of the bridges to accommodate a cycle path in line with the Healthy Streets approach. The two bridges are being replaced in one joint project to save public money and to reduce disruption. It had been hoped that the bridges would be opened by January 2019. It is disappointing that works are taking longer than expected, which means local residents are inconvenienced while the bridges are closed, but safety must take priority. This is a highly complex civil engineering project. During the initial investigations and enabling works, a number of unforeseen issues were encountered. For example, the team working on the Addiscombe Railway Park Bridge discovered a Victorian sewer system which was not detailed on any plans for the area. This has led to delays in the design phase of the project, while new engineering solutions were drawn up by the contractor. Replacing the two bridges in one project is the right approach for Transport for London, the borough, and most importantly, local people. There are still some site trials taking place whilst the final design is going through approval. It's important TfL and the Croydon Council get this right, as the bridges are expected to last 120 years. Over the last 2 weeks, TfL has been working closely with colleagues from the London Borough of Croydon to review and challenge the latest programme of works received from the main contractor. The local MP, Sarah Jones, has also raised concerns. The team's focus now is to find ways to significantly reduce the planned construction period to as short time as possible, making sure that safety remains the overriding priority. TfL and Croydon Council are working hard to complete the review as soon as possible and to be able to announce the planned reopening dates for the bridges later this year. We're expecting the main works to commence before the end of the year, and we are seeking to ensure that they complete as early as possible in 2020. Activity will increase in the coming weeks as key construction works commence. I've asked TfL to make sure that Assembly Member O'Connell, the local MP Sarah Jones, and local residents are kept updated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you're reading from the same briefing I got from Croydon Council as well, so thank you for that. I can't overstate the disruption. This might sound a local matter, but the disruption to residents and businesses since 2016 has been significant. This bridge closed in 2016, and at the present timings, it will be closed pretty much the whole entirety of your mayoralty. Can I ask you personally, and that was a TfL response, quite rightly, and I'm echoing Croydon Council's concerns around this, you'll understand that, is can I ask you what you can do personally to intervene, because this has taken so long, and I believe TfL have dragged their heels on this. Would you be able to personally intervene and to urge a speedier conclusion, if possible?
Chair, can I answer the Assembly Member in the affirmative and tell him we'll also contact not just by him, but by the local MP and for example, we were told that the high-level indicative programme estimates a completion date of around 2 years from now. It's not good enough, and so I've personally intervened in that, and we're working with TfL to see what we can do to interrogate that indicative timeline to speed that up, and I'll make sure he's kept updated of any progress we made, because he's right. We can't in City Hall dismiss this as a local project because local businesses are really being affected. I've read reports of one business, for example, closing down,
Indeed,
and that
yes.
worries me hugely. And so I can give the undertaking, Chair, to personally keep an interest in this.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much. I think you're right, and in terms of the approach, Mr Mayor, you're taking, but I think you should point out to Assembly Member O'Connell about the background that TfL have been working in. They've had to cut millions out of their budget, enforced by a Tory government. We've had the legacy of the Tory Mayor negotiating millions away and not receiving anything at all. And later on this agenda, we're going to talk about the Garden Bridge. And that all could have actually helped in terms of speeding up some of this process. But you're right to be concerned about business, and you're right to be concerned about getting the safety of residents and issues of doing this project forward. But people need to understand the consequences that actually these projects are not done in isolation. It's against the background and against the background of government cuts.
Well, Chair, I think it's worth the Assembly Member, particularly students from California, being aware of some of the waste that's taken place with the previous Mayor. £37 million spent so far on the Garden Bridge. But what Assembly Member Duval is alluding to is we in TfL are losing on average £700 million from the operating grant we receive. We're the only public transport system in the Western world not subsidised by central government. Additionally, the salt in the wound is the vehicle excise duty Londoners pay is going to be spent on roads outside of London. We get none of this money back in London. So public transport fare payers will be paying to improve the roads, including bridges in London. Clearly not acceptable. And that's why I continue to make savings in TfL whilst lobbying the government for a decent settlement.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Mr Mayor, if I can just reconfirm, Assembly Member Duval's intervention kind of disrupted the rather collegiate way we were approaching this issue. So can I confirm that you will work with myself, Croydon Council, MP Sarah Jones, to try to bring a fast resolution to this matter?
Can I just can I Chair, echo Karen do that, but also it's important that the Assembly members kept updated so we can also cascade the information down to the most important people here who are the constituents.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Russell on climate change.
Thank you, Chair. The IPCC's, so can I congratulate Senator Russell as well on the promotion. The IPCC's special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees is a wake-up call. The consequences of exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius average temperature across the globe are significant, and we only have a short time to act. We're already preparing for London to experience more frequent severe flooding in the winter and to have hotter, drier summers. This could affect all Londoners in the type of heat wave that is predicted to occur in the 2030s. It's estimated that 2/3 of flats could overheat. Nearly 1.3 million people already live and work in areas at risk of flooding, and that's why we're working hard to make London a more resilient city. We're doing all we can from City Hall to make sure London plays its part in mitigating climate change. London was among the first to achieve certification of a Paris Agreement compatible climate action plan by C40. This confirmation of compliance was sent by C40 in April 2018. My ambition is for London to be a zero carbon city by 2050, and we've set out plans to make this a reality in the London Environment Strategy, which has also been independently assessed to be 1.5 degrees compliant. This puts London's ambition well ahead of national government that is lagging well behind the IPCC's recommendations. I've reviewed the carbon reduction targets of London since I became mayor to make them more ambitious. London has also set ambitious short-term carbon budgets in my London Environment Strategy based on what is technically feasible with huge commitment and leadership. To give you an idea of the scale of action required, by 2035 you must retrofit nearly 1.5 million homes. That would require retrofitting of up to 150,000 homes in 1 year. We also need to change our heat to low carbon sources and create an entirely zero carbon transport network. We're taking action now to make this a reality and are introducing zero carbon standards for new buildings, bringing in the world's toughest low emission zones and improving the energy efficiency of buildings through my refit and renew programmes and our new £500 million energy efficient loan fund. But London can't do this alone. The government climate policies won't meet its own 8% carbon reduction target, let alone the Paris Agreement aims.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's good that you are aware of the seriousness of the IPCC report, and that you can see the serious potential impacts for Londoners. 1.5 degrees warming it's like a cliff edge, and beyond that we get to the very worst impacts of climate breakdown, floods, heat waves, extreme weather events, and wildfires becoming our new normal. Now, given that the IPCC say that this limit could be exceeded in as little as 12 years, that's by 2030. Yeah. So will you consider a 12-year emergency carbon reduction plan for London based on the IPCC recommendations?
Well, we already are doing more than the national government. As it is, for us to meet the ambitious targets, we've got 3 5-year budgets, carbon budgets going forward. We need the government to do much more than they currently are. So one of the reasons why...
You're right to criticise the government. They're forcing through fracking, Heathrow expansion, pulling the plug on solar, all of those things, then absolutely not showing any leadership. But I asked if you'd consider a 12-year emergency carbon reduction plan for London based on the IPCC report.
Sure, and I was about to explain what we've done is that the 3 5-year carbon reduction targets already shown to by the C40 to get us towards meeting the requirements of the Paris Accord. As it is, for us to meet those ambitious and stretching targets, we need the government to do much more. And I'm worried, as it currently stands, the government's not going to do enough for us to meet even those stretching targets. So the 2 criteria we've had is being ambitious, but being realistic. And some of the things we need, just to meet those targets, by the way, before you go even further, is we need the government to provide strong and consistent national policy that will help us meet our targets. We need help with regulation, economic incentives, and funding. Without those, some people are querying whether we can even reach the targets we currently have.
So, given that the government clearly needs to be doing more, would you, for instance, back a call for a national government task force working across departments to drive climate action at every level of government, so at local government, borough level, as well as at London level? Is that a call that you would back?
Yeah, and that's basically what we're doing in City Hall. You can't look at this in silos. The idea that simply one department looking at this is ridiculous. I mean, transport, housing, all the policy, the budget, the comprehensive spending review, all these things are linked. And you're right to remind us that we're the best one in the world, whether it's Michael Gove or Claire Perry, they by themselves can't do this, and it needs to buy in from all departments from government. And whether it's a task force or what we're doing here by mainstreaming the issue, that needs to happen as soon as possible.
Thank you. And finally, apart from the sort of big picture of decarbonising our city's infrastructure, the IPCC report lists examples of changes that we can make in our daily lives, like eating less meat and dairy, video conferencing rather than flying, walking and cycling more, using washing lines, not tumble dryers, the kind of changes that Londoners can make to move to a lower carbon way of living. Will you take on inspiring Londoners to take the threat of climate change seriously, as you have done with air pollution?
Oh, we've got it. I mean, look, for example, the last 2 C40 meetings I've done by telephone conference rather than attending them. And these are some of the examples of the things that we can do. A lot of this is common sense. One of the reasons why I was so keen, for example, for us to ensure we have water fountains across our city is for people to take some personal responsibility of refilling bottles. There are other examples we can do, and it doesn't need to be in a patronising, lecturing way. It's just being a bit more savvy about what we can do to contribute towards not having a situation where by 2030, that's what the fare is.
So do I take that as a yes, because I'm almost out of time?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Curtin and relates to Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. I'm calling for a first opportunity for the public to vote on the final deal negotiated by the Prime Minister, or on a no-deal Brexit if a deal is not secured. The British people voted in 2016 to leave the EU. It's no secret that I campaigned to remain, but I've always respected the result and worked to make the best of the situation. That's why since the referendum, I've given the government my support where appropriate as they've tried to negotiate with the EU. And it's why I've worked closely with the Brexit Secretary and other Cabinet members to push for the best possible deal. I've also met with various senior representatives from the EU and European countries to impress upon them that negotiating a good deal is in all of our interests. In good faith, I've given the government every bit of advice and information available to City Hall and every opportunity to strike a deal that would minimise the impact on people's livelihoods. But I've become increasingly alarmed as the chaotic approach to the negotiations has become mired in confusion and deadlock, leading us down a path that could be hugely damaging. The government's actions over the last 2 years has left us with two possible outcomes: a bad deal or, worse still, no deal at all. Both these scenarios are a million miles away from what was promised during the EU referendum campaign and pose huge risks. The Prime Minister simply doesn't have a mandate to gamble so flagrantly with jobs, growth and a nation's security. People didn't vote to leave the EU to make themselves poorer, to watch their businesses suffer, to have NHS wards understaffed, to see the police preparing for civil unrest, or for national security to be put at risk. So after careful consideration, I've decided that the British public must get the final say on Brexit. This means, short of a general election, there must be a public vote on any deal if the government is able to agree one, or a vote on a no-deal Brexit if they're not, alongside the option of staying in the EU. It's clear that it's time to take this crucial issue out of the hands of politicians and return it to the people so they can take back control.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I do wonder if you've been asleep in the last couple of years and you've missed the main point and the main feature of what's been happening in our democracy since you became mayor in 2016, and a few weeks after the people of this country voted to leave the European Union. You talk about a people's vote, but we've already had a people's vote, and 17.4 million people in this country voted to take back control of our sovereignty, our laws, our borders, our money, our agriculture and our fishing grounds. And that cannot be overturned.
Are you going to ask a question?
I'm coming to the question. And you're joining this campaign for a people's vote. Isn't that a flagrant and brazen attempt to overturn the democratic will of the British people?
The leader of UKIP, a man probably none of you have heard of, it's called Gerald Batten. He said...
Gerard.
Until this morning, I'd not heard of him either. He said that doing a deal with the EU would be the easiest deal to make in history. You could do it over a cup of tea in the afternoon. Do you agree with him?
It would be very easy if the EU weren't so difficult and were throwing obstacles in the way of this country, which is what we've seen over the last couple of years. And obviously, you know, what I may agree with you slightly on is the fact that we haven't had any good negotiation from Theresa May, and we would have had a much better set of negotiations if someone from UKIP were in charge, as obviously you seem to be alluding. But Mr. Mayor, one of the major politicians who campaigned to remain said this shortly after, and I wonder if you agree with this person. He said, the problem for those that are saying to the British public that there should be a second referendum is that it would lead to even more cynicism. It would lead to the British public saying, hold on a sec, these were the rules of the game, we voted in record numbers and now you're ignoring us. But the reality is the British public had a say. They voted and they voted to leave. Now, the name of that person was Sadiq Khan. It's you. Why are you not agreeing with yourself anymore?
Well, I think the point is, even the leader of your party has been proved to be wrong in relation to the possibility of doing a deal with the European Union. Nobody said during the referendum campaign that we'd have the police planning for civil unrest. Nobody said, who campaigned for us to leave the EU, that the NHS would be stockpiling medicine for 6 weeks. Nobody said, who was campaigning to leave the EU, that we'd have NHS wards in London understaffed because EU citizens, who are Londoners by the way, have chosen to leave our country. Those campaigning to leave the EU didn't say you'd have businesses who are relocating to other cities across Europe, taking some of their back office staff to cities as diverse as Frankfurt to Paris. Those leaving the EU didn't say that the European Medicines Agency would relocate from London to Amsterdam, taking at least 900 jobs with them. Those campaigning to leave the EU said that doing a deal with the EU would lead to us having access to the single market. Not the case. those who were campaigning to leave the European Union said that we would get £350 million each week going towards the NHS as a consequence of us leaving the EU. It didn't happen. So all the promises made during the referendum campaign by you and colleagues, and those you revere and idolise, like Boris Johnson, have been proved to be wrong. And the point that I'm making is that nobody said we'd have two options, either a bad deal or a no deal when it came to us leaving the European Union. And in those circumstances, I think the British public should have a say on deciding whether they accept bad deal, and that includes, by the way, no deal, or whether they want to stay in the European Union. Bearing in mind all the promises made by you and your side have shown to be mistruths, lies and fantasy.
Mr. Mayor, as people have said all the way through, no deal is better than a bad deal. And as many of the people said on both sides of the argument, leaving the European Union means leaving in full, leaving the single market and leaving the customs union. But I do appreciate your skills in filibustering, Mr. Mayor, because you've talked me out of my time, and unfortunately I don't have time for any other questions. Pass back to you, Mr. Chair.
Right. The next question is from Assembly Member Cooper and relates to Brexit and the environment.
Thank
you. Again. I'm sorry, Len.
Apologies, Chairman.
Chair, you've got to look towards the left more often.
I find it difficult, but I'm learning.
Mr. Mayor, sometimes I listen respectively to counsel the Assembly members' comments about democracy and following the rules of democracy. And, you know, it's always a difficult issue. It's not a difficult issue in the sense of how you believe about, you know, democracy. I think you're right to point out things and events can change. But what I really was waiting to hear Assembly Member Curtin say, that, you know, there are people in his party, right, who, and I don't know whether Assembly Member Curtin believes in them, who I'm not convinced believes in democracy, who their views are not the same of following it. They use democracy, but their ultimate aim is not to follow democracy, is to replace it by a dictatorship. UKIP had a very proud record of trying to keep the far right out of its party.
Is there a question?
This seems to have been changed, and the question is this, is that do you think, you know, Assembly Member Curtin should think about, you can choose you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. One of the people he's welcomed into the party, who I suspect,
but what is the question?
I suspect does not agree with democracy, is one of those who taught his girlfriend's dog to give Nazi salutes in response to the word seagull.
Assembly Member Duval, this question is not about London and is indeed not a question.
Is a modern day Nazi.
Assembly Member Duval,
anti-Muslim, or this.
Stop.
Do you think he is? I've done a question, Chair.
See, this is not right.
No, please. Assembly Member Duval, that didn't appear to relate to London. It appeared to relate to an attack on Assembly Member Curtin. And indeed, I'm not even sure what the question was.
Do you think it's good for London, Mr. Mayor? I'll rephrase the question. Do you think it's good for London for those who hide behind democratic practices, who are not clear, because I'm not clear, whether they support democracy 100%, and that they are moving towards some of those people that believe
Assembly Member Duval, you're returning to an attack on another member. That isn't the function of this meeting.
Mr. Chair, I've just been called by the Assembly member has just called me a Nazi. I would ask that he withdraw that.
I said you were.
David, he did.
I said you weren't.
David, he did.
I didn't believe you was. But are you?
Okay, thank you.
In fact, he said the opposite.
Are you?
Right. Okay.
Oh well, that's good.
I don't believe you.
Do you think we could move on to the next question from Assembly Member Cooper, which relates to the environment and Brexit, which I hope isn't so controversial?
Well, Chair. Chair, the government has said it wants the UK to be at least as green outside of the EU as it is within it. But so far, its words have not been met with action, and the threat of a no-deal Brexit could have serious implications for the environment. For the past 40 years, the EU has helped to ensure that UK governments have cleaned up our air and waterways and protected our wildlife. This was achieved by European institutions enforcing environmental legislation and holding member states to account, including providing citizens with a mechanism to make complaints. European enforcement action around the Air Quality Directive played a pivotal role in focusing government attention and unlocking funding to ensure London met legal limits for PM10. It's critical that this important enforcement tool continues in the UK to ensure that government is doing everything it can to protect and clean up our dangerously polluted air and to protect the health of citizens. The government has proposed a green watchdog to fill this governance gap in environmental enforcement when the UK leaves the EU as part of a new Clean Air and Environment Bill. Whilst I welcome a new bill and the commitment to a new watchdog, I am concerned about how credible this will be based on what the government has proposed so far. We responded to the consultation on the watchdog and made it clear that to fill this governance gap, it is critical that this body is independent and has a power and responsibility to hold government to account, including taking government to court and being able to levy fines. I'm also deeply concerned that the government's proposals currently do not extend to climate change. In light of the recent IPCC report, it is essential that the loophole is closed. I would once again urge government to ensure that these issues are addressed in its final proposals. A no-deal Brexit with no transition period risks the UK having no mechanism in place to hold the government to account on environmental issues. I'm extremely concerned that this would create a governance gap that existing environmental authorities would be unable to fill given their current stretched resources. This risks the UK falling behind the rest of Europe with poorer air quality and less green protections. This simply must not happen.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor, and you won't be surprised to hear that I share many of your concerns about the impact of Brexit in terms of legislation around air quality. I just wondered if I could ask you a little bit on the polluter pays principle, which is very important in EU law, but has also underlain the concept of both the T charge, the toxicity charge, and also the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone. So Londoners who do not own or use a vehicle are not paying, but those who do. Have we had adequate reassurance from government that that principle, which is one that is very, very much throughout European law, is something we're going to be able to continue to use in London?
Well, earlier on, Senator Duval alluded to the difference between national Conservative policy and the policy of those who are members of the Conservative Party in Assembly. And this is an example of the difference between Tory Assembly members and the Tory Party nationally. So the Conservative government appears to be in favour of the polluter principle, and their proposals appear to support our view that those who pollute should pay. The Conservative candidate standing to be the mayor of this great city is against both the T charge and ULEZ. Another example of him being out of sync with his party. We shouldn't be surprised by this confusion in their policy. I'm quite clear, though, in relation to the replacement for the EU, both in terms of legislation and both in terms of watchdog. We need to make sure that the polluter pays principle is in there, which means the rest of us who are suffering the consequences of, for example, poor air quality, from underdeveloped lungs to asthma to dementia, at least have those who've caused this paying towards some of the remedial steps necessary.
Well, that's encouraging to hear that the government is going to continue to allow us to use those tools. But I, like you, am concerned that Assembly Member Bailey, who's the lead for the Conservatives on this Assembly on environmental issues, has described the T-charge and other measures as pointless. And given that it's now almost exactly a year since the T-charge has launched, and I, like you, had to talk to a lot of people just before it came in about its likely impact. I wondered if you could update us on the impact so far and how much air quality has improved already, looking forward to the ULEZ next year.
Well, as you remember, the T-charge is part of a package of measures that we've introduced since May 2016. I've lost track on which ones the Conservative Party support, which ones they don't support. But they include the low-emission bus zone, which led to huge improvements of air in your constituency in Putney, but also around Brixton. We're not procuring any more diesel buses. We now only get electric, hydrogen-powered or hybrid. There's less than 6 months to go until the ULEZ comes on stream, which is the world's first ultra-low emission zone. The T-charge is a precursor to the ultra-low emission zone. And the good news in relation to the T-charge, was a number of vehicles that prior to the T-charge were coming into central London are now no longer coming into central London. So people have changed their behaviour as a consequence of the T-charge. And an example of good, sensible policies leading to changes made by individuals. And you'll be aware that one of the factors that Michael Gove himself said for him, deciding to introduce a bill was because of the work we're doing in London. So where we lead, others follows. It's just a shame that doesn't extend to the Conservative candidate running to be the mayor of this great city.
Well, it doesn't really sound as though the activity that we've taken so far is as pointless as Assembly Member Bailey has implied, because not just the government, but I think also other mayors around the rest of the country, you convened a session in June on National Clean Air Day, and it looks as though mayors around the rest of the country are looking to London for leadership rather than seeing what we're doing as pointless.
Well, it's not just mayors around the country. We've got councils in London, Conservative councils, some in support of ULEZ, some lobby me to go further, including Wandsworth. And so a good example of the Conservative Party being in disarray in relation to what each component part stands for. But you're right, not only within London do we have cross-party support, by and large, but also around the country, the metro mayors, whether it's in the West Midlands, the West of England, Tees Valley, Liverpool, Greater Manchester. You've seen an example of us coming together, including the core cities and those who are outside the core cities. And Michael Gove attended the summit we held to lobby for a change. It does require a combination of carrots and sticks, but we've got to make sure we take steps to sort the air out in London. It is a killer. It leads to premature deaths, it leads to underdeveloped lungs, and it leads to a situation where there are too many adults with a vast variety of illnesses, from, as I said, dementia to heart disease and cancer as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'm received constant correspondence from Londoners who are very grateful for the work and your leadership on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
The next question on sex workers is withdrawn for a written reply. So we now go on to Assembly Member Copley's question, which relates to Brexit, what a surprise, and affordable housing.
Almost it's a big
Thank
issue,
you, Chair. Brexit poses huge risks to building new homes in London, including the social rented and other genuinely affordable homes. The wider economy, the uncertainty and Brexit are all factors outside City Hall's control. In one recent survey, almost half of home builders said Brexit uncertainty is making them feel less positive about investment. In another, 2/3 of construction firms said they don't believe the government is committed to getting a good deal for their industry. In the face of this reckless approach, City Hall will continue to provide as much stability and support as possible. My approach to plan and offer certainty around affordable housing contributions and the £4.82 billion funding we secured last year means that we saw a record number of genuinely affordable homes get underway. But the truth is that the government has given us this funding for affordable homes at historically low rates. In their calculations, ministers assume affordable homes in a development will be heavily cross-subsidised by market sale properties. Whatever happens with Brexit, the way we build homes, and in particular affordable homes, needs to become less reliant on expensive market sale homes and less vulnerable to fluctuations in their prices. We want to see housing associations and councils taking the lead and building far more in London. Our Building Council Homes for Londoners programme, the first ever City Hall programme dedicated to council house building, will support at least 10,000 new council homes, and just today we announced £10 million of funding to boost staff and training in councils to help them achieve this. But to see a true step change in what councils can do, we need the government to go further. The Prime Minister's announcement that caps on councils borrowing to build homes will be lifted is something I and others have long called for. We're still waiting for the details, including when this will actually happen. But the reforms must not stop there. We need much greater, longer-term funding for affordable homes, with far stronger powers for councils over land to build the homes we need. There is no doubt that Brexit will make it even harder to address London's housing crisis. I'm fighting for the best possible outcome and will continue to do all I can to build social, rented and other genuinely affordable homes for Londoners.
Thank you for that answer, Mr Mayor. You touched on one of my follow-up questions, which is about the rate of grant. And of course, it's very welcome that in London you've significantly increased the rate of grant compared to your predecessor. But of course, national government policy, and particularly in the Cameron-Osborne years, was to cut grant to housing associations and leave them increasingly reliant
on cross-subsidy, and housing associations, even in London, of course, are using the cross-subsidy model. Are you concerned that a funding model which includes significant cross-subsidy is going to leave housing associations exposed if there is a housing market crash as a result of
absolutely. When you speak to developers, and by the put aside for a second housing associations, I'll come back to them in a second, but developers are worried about their ability to cross-subsidise when it comes to private schemes where they've agreed to provide a certain number of affordable homes. When you look at the model that housing associations use, they need the cross-subsidy, and the fluctuations in the market don't help. And I think this provides an opportunity. The sort of counter-cyclical nature of housing prices means that the government was sensible and invested, councils and housing associations could build the homes that aren't going to be built because of Brexit uncertainty.
Absolutely, and of course the counter-cyclical approach was one I think that Gordon Brown took post the previous crash,
right,
where the grant rates were significantly increased for housing associations.
Well, on that, just 2 points, just worth reminding you. One is, during the 1970s, councils were building, roughly speaking, 20,000 homes a year. In the last 7, it's been 2,000. But the amount of grant money we received from the central government is half what we received in 2009, 2010 from the then Labour government under Gordon's leadership.
Can I just move on quickly to the issue of skills, because of course 28% of our construction workforce in London is from the EU, and some do think that that's an underestimate. It might be more than that, and of course that leaves us very exposed as well. Could you set out some of the things you're doing, particularly in terms of support for modular housing, and do you think that modular housing and factory-built homes could provide a major part of the solution?
Well, firstly, the figures I have is almost 100,000 construction workers in London are EU citizens. It's roughly speaking a third. And so if it's the case, we have a no-deal scenario, real question marks about what happens to the construction sector. In any event, we've got to accelerate efforts to get Londoners skilled up to have the construction skills they need going forward, irrespective of what happened with Brexit, but it's accelerate the need. So we've got a combination of the Construction Skills Academy doing work there, but also you're right in relation to, you call it modular, I think the phrase uses precision manufacturing. Nicky Gavron's done a lot of work in relation to this area. That provides an opportunity in relation to putting components together. Different skill set. It also could lead to greater diversity in the construction workforce as well. And we're looking at how we can accelerate precision manufacturing. The Homes for Londoners board are doing work in relation to this, and as a subgroup, looking at how we can accelerate precision manufacturing.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Twycross.
The Landlord Association has expressed concern that the government's hostile environment policy within the context of Brexit will create conditions for a new Windrush-style scandal as EU citizens find themselves unable to access housing in the private rented sector. Do you share their concerns, and how can you support EU citizens worried about whether they'll have a place to live or be able to find a place to live after the UK leaves the EU?
I absolutely share the concerns. I think also Shelter and the JCWI have expressed similar concerns, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, in relation to the right to rent provisions. In my view, they should be scrapped. Because what's happening is landlords are having to act like UKBA and do immigration checks on a prospective tenant, and that leads to all sorts of discrimination in relation to the provision of housing. Just to reassure you, Assemblyman Twycross and the Assembly, as part of the work we're doing to help EU citizens, Londoners, is the online portal for EU citizens will have with it advice and assistance and signposting, but separately we're supporting the funding for some outreach work for civil society groups to go out and speak to these Londoners, EU citizens, who, because of the hostile environment, may be deterred from getting decent housing and the other consequences of the government's catastrophic handling on negotiations with the EU and its consequences.
Thank you. And will you ask the Deputy Mayor for Housing to provide advice to landlords as well, who may actually be unclear about what their responsibilities and duties are?
Absolutely happy to look into that. I think the government's already, as part of their consultation panel, got the Landlords Association on there. We'll make sure we feed into that as well to make sure that proper guidance is given, because what we don't want to do is well-intentioned landlords with good intentions making bad decisions, and there's both direct discrimination possible, but also indirect discrimination possible as well. So I'll make sure that's passed on to Deputy Mayor James Murray.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Desai's question is on Brexit and policing.
Thank Thank you, Chair. During the referendum, there was very little talk about the prospect of Britain leaving the EU with no deal at all. But time is running out, and the reality is that Theresa May has failed to negotiate a Brexit position with her own party, let alone agree a deal with the EU. With time rapidly running out, we're left with two possibilities: a bad deal or a no-deal Brexit. Both outcomes could have dire consequences for security in London. Leaving without a deal would mean not only unravelling the legal framework of cooperation with the EU, which I've consistently highlighted, but also have wider effects on the Met's everyday operations. But let's also be clear what this means. The National Police Coordination Centre report that Assembly Desire refers to describes a real possibility of the police needing to call in the military to help with civil disorder. It warns of an, and I quote, unprecedented and overwhelming disruption to the road network, and it raises concerns about the status of EU nationals working in policing. I don't remember any of these promoted on the side of a bus during the campaign. Broader contingency planning is overseen by the Deputy Commissioner, who chairs a regular Met Police board on this issue. It's proper and prudent this work is underway, and I'm confident the Met are working hard to mitigate the potential adverse effects of a range of Brexit scenarios. We can't pretend there will be no impact on policing. I've discussed the security consequences of Brexit with the government, and my Deputy Mayor and I meet the Met Police Commissioner regularly, and our discussions including the potential impact of Brexit on the ability of the Met to provide safety and security for Londoners. The Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner have been clear that a no-deal Brexit is likely to mean working with European partners will be slower and less efficient, and this can only lead to London being less secure. As Mayor of London, I've been left with no choice but to plan for the worst possible scenarios from the negotiations, and that's why I've asked the London Resilience Forum to establish the impact of a no-deal Brexit on critical areas, which includes our ability to maintain law and order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This week is National Hate Crime Awareness Week, as you'll be aware, and there's an aspect of Brexit that I think the debate hasn't focused upon, and that is the maintenance of our social cohesion. So in the aftermath of the referendum of 2016, there was a spike in hate crime, and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary warned that there's a real possibility there will be a similar increase in reports in 2019 if, as anticipated by the government, UK formally leaves the European Union. Now, this was back in July. Just yesterday, the Met Police themselves said there could be a hike in spike in hate crime before the UK's planned departure from the EU in March. And Superintendent Wahid Khan, Scotland Yard's Deputy Head of Hate Crime, who I know from his time working in Neom, he says, if you look at what happened in the Brexit referendum come March, you would expect some kind of response at that time in the attacks that take place. We will do what we can to prevent an upturn. There's been a 17% rise in hate crimes, going up to 94,098 in the 12 months to March. And indeed, as the head of the hate crime unit, the Met said, only half of all hate crimes are reported to the police. And as I said, one of the things that we've not talked about in the Brexit context is the breakdown of social cohesion. The leak report that you already referred to talks about a disruption and social unrest likely in the 3 months either side of 29th of March. And there's something else, and I'm coming to my question, Chair. There's something else that I do want to draw attention to. There's an upsurge in far right-wing activity in London over the summer. Over the last 3 months, there have been 3 marches by the so-called Democratic Football Lads Alliance and the English Defence League, attended by people like Gerard Batten, the leader of UKIP, and Rahil Kasim. I may add, there are some sinister people out there, sinister forces waiting to exploit post-Brexit uncertainties. And it is indeed a very worrying situation. I myself attended some of the all the counter demonstrations this summer, and tomorrow there's an international conference against racism and fascism and to organize against it in London. So what are you and the Met doing to prepare for all this? And what are your particular thoughts about the maintenance of our social fabric and community cohesion in London?
Well, can I say, Chairman, I'm not sure if colleagues are aware, but Senator Desai has been an anti-racist campaigner for most of his life, and that's when we first met. Been involved in an anti-racist campaign. And none of us could have imagined that in 2018 we'd be reliving the sort of things we thought we'd left behind in the 1970s and 1980s. Some of the language used by the far right in the heart of the most diverse city in the world should cause all of us concern. And the reason why you're right to refer to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire Services and police officers is these aren't politicians who may be saying things in order to garner support, or, as some would allege, to scaremonger. These are experts looking at the evidence in the recent past and expressing concern that based on what they've seen in the past and some of the things happening in our city and our country, there could well be an increase, an even greater increase in hate crime and a spike after certain events. And so we've got to be vigilant. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important that we're careful with language. And the idea that a party aspiring to be a mainstream party should be recruiting members at a far-right demonstration beggars belief. And that's why Senator Duval is so angry at some of the comments made by UKIP in this assembly, because it's the barefaced hypocrisy in relation to what they claim to stand for, and what happens in 1,500 mayoral questions and over 400 plenary questions. The GLA has answered 934 freedom of information requests in 2017 and 18, a 77% increase on 2015 and 16, the last full year of the previous mayor, while maintaining excellent response times. I've refreshed the format for the State of London debate, including my deputy mayors on the panel, with live streaming of the event on Facebook with subtitles. Similarly, People's Question Time has now been to boroughs it's not been to before, including Barking and Dagenham, Sutton, Hounslow next week to Islington. Yeah. But I want administration to lead the way for accountability across the public sector and beyond. That's why we've gone further than any previous administration and are now publishing gender and BAME pay gap audits for the GLA group. Accountability and engagement go hand in hand. And Talk London, a website where Londoners can engage with the work of City Hall, is a great example of how I'm enhancing opportunities for Londoners to get involved with the work we do. Membership has nearly trebled from 15,400 to 44,000 Londoners. We're making it more representative of Londoners, and we received over 11,000 responses to consultations on my statutory strategies through Talk London. This was part of the biggest ever engagement of Londoners in the development of the statutory strategies. Transparency continues to be enhanced across the board. Early in my term, we updated the GLA Group's corporate governance framework to enhance its transparency provisions and address specific Assembly recommendations. We're now publishing richer information about the grants the GLA provides, and the GLA under my direction has for the first time ever signed up to the Office for National Statistics Code of Practice. The London Data Store is reaching over 45,000 individuals across academia, public, private and third sector organisations each month, and my team is liaising with boroughs to promote the take-up of the London Data Store as a data publishing platform. As part of the new governance arrangements for the London Fire Brigade, I've ensured that the London Fire Commissioner must come to me or my Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience for consent on significant decisions, with those decisions and supporting information published wherever possible. I've taken action to ensure the whole GLA family has learned lessons from the embarrassing way the previous Mayor handled the Garden Bridge project. Specifically at TfL, they've strengthened their processes, training and guidance for procurement, and I've brought in a new board and committee structure that reduces the use of delegated authority and looks more closely at mayoral decisions. And when it comes to what's happening in this very building, I published my diary and have appointed new and diverse board members and senior officials that are embedding the culture of accountability I want to see. Mary Harpley has recently joined us as our new Chief Officer. Mary is accountable to me for delivery, and I've made it an early priority for her to look at the performance management mechanisms used within the organisation. The Assembly will see the early results of Mary's focus on this in our Q2 reporting, with better quality and more timely information across a wider range of measures.
Thank you. In the interests of accountability, can you confirm that you authorised a quote in City AM on Wednesday from your spokesperson, claiming that you were not reducing the planned number of homes at Old Oak Common?
So,
there was a quote in from the Mayor's spokesman. A spokesman for Calm said the Mayor is not reducing the planned number of homes and jobs at Old Oak Common. Would that be authorised by yourself?
I can't comment on every single quote we give, but I think there was a letter written the next day maybe from Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe that may be more helpful.
That's correct, and it then said it's simply untrue to suggest that the Mayor is reducing the number of homes at Old Oak Common. And you stand by those comments?
I'm aware of the letter from Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe more so than a spokesperson quote.
you're aware of them, and they have your authorisation to make them.
I'm aware of Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe's letter the next day. I'm not aware of the specific spokesperson quotes you referred to.
Okay, but let's just pick on Jules Pipe's letter. You support that contention?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The local plan for the OPDC, which you were in charge of, proposes to set a target of 20,100 new homes in the OPDC area. However, the previous draft from June 2017 set a target of 22,350. Would you agree that 20,100 is in fact lower than 22,350?
Well, as numbers go, they are, but I've not got before me the context of the OPDC housing plans you're talking about. What I am aware is that we've submitted to the government an application from the Housing Infrastructure Fund that will allow us to build a considerable amount of homes in Old Oak North. And I met this week with the Chief Executive and Chair of OPDC, and they're extremely confident, as indeed I am, if that application is successful, we'll be able to meet the target of homes that we're going to build on OPDC.
Is it not the case, Mr. Mayor, that if I've got both of those drafts in front of me, the one from June 2017 clearly says that the target is 22,350, and the draft from the 14th of June, I'm not allowed to use props, but if I were, I would be showing you this. The one from 14th of June clearly says that the target is now 20,100, and yet your spokesman and your deputy mayor are saying there has been no reduction.
But I think that's why, Chair, it's really important for the sake of context and completeness for the Assembly member to read out Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe's letter to the Assembly. It's not a prop.
Happy to.
He could read that out and we could all be aware of what Jules says.
Yes, the Deputy Mayor says that, if you'll excuse me, 25,000 new homes. And
well, I think they're complete letters, to be fair. You can't pick and choose.
Okay, I'll do that. Am I okay to do that?
Let's read out the whole letter.
It's simply untrue to suggest...
Sorry, you're asking Sean or Gareth?
Sorry?
I'm not sure who...
No, I'm asking him to read out the whole letter.
It is simply untrue to suggest that the Mayor is reducing the number of homes at the Old Oak Common. This is a flagship regeneration project, and the figures referred into the article simply refer to the phases of delivery. So, in that...
Oh, no.
No, I'll carry on. No, if you want to hear the end...
You're either going to... You can't...
If you don't read them yourselves, that's fine.
Well, I think the point, Chair, is the Assembly should read the entire letter.
No, I've asked him to read out the whole letter.
The Mayor firmly believes that the government's... that with government support, the Old Oak Common has long-term potential to develop 25,500 new homes and 65,000 new jobs, as has always been the plan.
So I missed those... Chair, I mean, he's mumbling.
It is worth recalling the appalling mess, blah, blah, inherited at Old Oak from his predecessor, who rushed headlong into agreeing a land deal, blah, blah. It has taken Khan a great deal of time to clean up that mess. Well, great hero this guy is. But we are fully committed to delivering a scheme that will revitalise this part of London. We want to squeeze every drop of opportunity out of this. We look forward to hearing from the government regarding its funding decision. So, was there a reduction from 22,350 between the first plan to 20,100 in the second draft plan?
I stand by the letter, excluding the blah-blahs, read out by Senator Buff, which alludes to what the Deputy Mayor for Planning was saying this week.
Okay. So you would therefore claim that the number of homes was not being reduced. Is that correct?
Well, I think Jules has set out what the position is.
Well, I'm asking you,
Well,
why should I ask the Deputy Mayor when the Mayor's here?
Well, because...
are you claiming that the number of homes is not being reduced?
I'm standing by what Jules Pipe said in his letter to City AM last week that you read an extract from.
So you're standing by the idea that there is not a reduction in the number of homes, is that correct?
Well, I think Jules' letter spells it out.
That's great. I mean, if you want to defer, just make him the Mayor. But You know, you're the mayor. This is why you're here and not your deputy mayor. Do you stand by the claim that the number of homes was not being reduced as indicated by your spokesman for Calm? The mayor is not reducing the planned number of homes and jobs at Old Oak Common.
I stand by the letter read out by you.
Okay,
from
so you
Deputy
don't stand by what your spokesman has said.
Well, as such, I'm not aware of every spokesperson quote given out by this building. There are dozens every week. What I am willing to do is stand by what Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe wrote in the CTA, an extract of which you read out earlier on today.
Do you not have confidence in your spokesman?
I've got huge confidence in those who work for me.
Thank you. If we go on, Mr. Mayor, do you agree? In June, at the Housing Strategy plenary, you told this Assembly that there had not previously been a target in the London Housing Strategy for affordable-sized homes. Do you stand by those comments?
In the previous London plan, there is no target, no.
London Housing Strategy and London Plan. There wasn't one in London Housing.
In the London Plan.
There wasn't one in the London.
In the London Plan, no.
And yet, at that plenary, you indicated that there were no targets set in either of the two things in relation to. I'll quote you. As a consequence of points raised by the Assembly, I look back at the previous London Plan and the previous housing strategy. There were no targets set in either of those two things in relation to the mix of homes. Do you stand by that, Mr. Mayor?
Chair, can I help you and the Assembly? I've not got before me either the London Plan, the draft London Plan, the housing strategy passed by me, by the previous Mayor, or the transcript of the plenary session. So the answer I give is going to be hazy for obvious reasons. Now, the obvious thing to do and the courteous thing to do, if the Assembly wants a full answer, is to give me notice, and I'll have the papers in front of me. So you'll appreciate, Chair, why I can't answer a specific question about what I said in June, bearing in mind I do various plenaries and various hearings.
No, Mr. Mayor, you ought to be able to confirm that you agree with something that you said.
As I just did.
Asking you
As
to
I just did.
So,
we go around in circles, that's all.
So did you confirm that you said that there were no targets set in either those two things, London Plan and Housing Strategy, in relation to the mix of homes? Are you sticking to what you said in June?
I am.
You are. Thank you. Page 29 of the Housing Strategy.
If I could be given a copy, Chair.
Of what?
Whatever you're quoting.
Sure. Page 29 of the
Housing
Housing Strategy. I'll get it for you. I have it marked.
The entire chapter for context would be helpful for me.
There you go.
And some time to read it as well.
I can also.
Yes, stop the clock. Yes, we'll stop the clock whilst it's handed to you.
Thank you very much, thanks. Okay, Chair, what do you want me to look at?
Do you want time to read that?
No, well, I'm not sure what I've been asked to look at.
Right, thank you. On page 29 of the Housing Strategy, it's outlined there.
No, he's starting the clock now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Page 29 of the Housing Strategy in 2014 says 36% of discounted rented homes to be 3 bedrooms or larger, and where there is a specific local need.
Sorry, Chair, this is the Housing Strategy, not the London Plan.
Yeah, that's right. And you referred back in June to both the Housing Strategy and the London Plan, and you said there were no targets in either, and you've just confirmed to us that that was the case. That before you is the Housing Strategy, and it most definitely has a reference to a target. Were you how is this consistent? How is that consistent with your claim that there had not previously been a family homes target in the Housing Strategy?
Well, Chair, I've been quite clear in relation to the draft London Plan versus the old London Plan. I'm now being asked to consider this document. So the question is, how is this document consistent with the evidence I gave at the plenary? Which part of this document does the Senator want me to go to?
I've highlighted it for you. There's a tab on the right-hand side. Page 29.
Right.
Yes, this is spinning out time.
I'm just trying to get you, Mr. Mayor, to confirm what you've already said, because the principle of accountability is that when we ask a question, we get an accurate and non-misleading reply.
Well,
really what we're trying to get to in this subject, in this section on accountability.
Well, if it helps, Chair, I'm happy to confirm that the Homes for London Housing Strategy June 2014, under the section Part 2, which is called Setting the Ambition, says at page 29, the funding prospectus seeks to increase the supply of affordable housing and the provision of new high-quality, smaller homes for rent to encourage people to move from unoccupied family-sized homes. It seeks bids for 36% of discounted rented homes to be 3-bedroom or larger, and where there is a specific local need, providers are encouraged to make provision for even larger homes, 4 or more bedrooms. The GLA will review and report on the impact of this policy, and under occupation is addressed, the Mayor will focus, as unoccupation is addressed, the Mayor will focus investment in future programmes on a greater proportion of larger homes in line with the 2013 Strategic Housing Market Assessment. So the obvious follow-up question, Chair, is was that target of 36% met?
No, that is not the question, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, that's a surprise.
That is not the question, Mr. Mayor. The question is very clear. You said that no such target existed. Do you now accept that you were mistaken or you were misleading the Assembly?
No, Chair, unless I've got the transcript of what I said in the June plenary session, I simply can't answer.
I've got one of those if you want that.
Yes.
I've got a transcript of what you said.
Of my entire session?
Of your entire session.
Let's do it.
Which perhaps you could provide that to the Mayor, if we can hold the clock.
Yeah, we'll stop the clock. I think, Mr. Mayor, when someone is reading something out from a transcript and he says it's a transcript, I think we should accept that he actually is reading.
Oh, no, but Chair, that's not the point. The point is you can't extrapolate 2 lines, thank you very much, 2 lines from an hour session without the context of the session being included.
Well, it seems to me, and it must seem to the people who are watching this and to members of the Assembly, you're simply being asked to confirm whether something you said at a previous meeting was something you actually did say.
Chair, so if you restart the clock, I'll go to the page that...
Yeah.
Okay, which page of the transcript do you want me to go to?
You've got the tabs. You've got the tabs. Mr. Mayor, I feel for you and your discomfort here because you're now being asked to be held to account for things that you said that are palpably not true. And I know that's difficult for you. What Londoners are looking for is for you just to own up, Mr. Mayor.
Is the question?
Can you own up, Mr. Mayor, to the fact that you were mistaken when you and your Deputy Mayor for Housing both said that there were no targets under your predecessor's housing strategy?
If it will assist Senator Bacon, who's worried about time, I'm very happy to take these away, look at these, write to the Senate member, copy in the entire Assembly so I can clarify any misunderstanding that Senator member Boff may be under.
Mr. Mayor, I would welcome that, and I would welcome that to be spread to the rest of the Assembly, and in addition, whether or not, if you find that your comments were inaccurate, whether or not you would apologise both to the Assembly and to Londoners for misleading them.
I'd be very surprised if I was the wrong one here and you were the right one here, but we'll see.
Thank you very much.
Have we come to an end on that one?
Come to an end.
Okay. Well, there we are. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, on the subject of accountability, given your role as the chair of TfL, to what extent do you consider you should be held accountable for decisions made by your Deputy Mayor and/or Transport for London? Can you confirm that the buck stops with you?
Yeah, I'm the chair of the TfL board, yeah.
Sorry, are you saying that the buck does stop with you or it doesn't?
Well, it depends which buck we're talking about. Well, I'm the chair of the TfL board, yeah.
Okay. So, on the 19th of July, Crossrail executives reported to the Crossrail board that, and I quote, they could no longer have confidence in the date of opening for December. your Deputy Mayor for Transport rightly urged a review on the plans for the remaining construction activity. Although you were not at that meeting, can you confirm that Heidi Alexander kept you fully aware of developments?
I think towards the end of July, there was concern expressed by the TfL board and others about the pressures and challenges that Crossrail Limited were talking about. Crossrail Limited still thought they could meet the opening of the central section by December 2018, but the TfL commissioned a piece of work to be undertaken in relation to the scheduling that Crossrail were telling the TfL board, and that piece of work that was commissioned reported at the end of August at the special Crossrail board meeting organised for August, and that was the first time that Heidi and myself were aware that the December opening of central section will be delayed to the extent that it would open until autumn 2019. Throughout the course of the project, there have been challenges and pressures before, and to give credit to Crossrail Limited, to be fair to them, in the past they've managed to address the pressures and challenges they've had. But because the TfL board, as I understand, and the meeting that wasn't that you referred to, because TfL were concerned about some of the scheduling, they asked for the additional work to be undertaken, which reported back end of August.
So, are you saying then, Mr. Mayor, that you were aware there could be a delay earlier than the date that you initially claimed you were aware, i.e. after that meeting, and quite rightly your Deputy Mayor instructed the extra research into the timings and so on the remaining amount of work. Did she mention that to you just after the 19th, that she had asked for that piece of work to be done, that there was a possibility that there could be a delay?
I met with, put aside the TfL board meeting for a second, I met with Crossrail Limited people, that includes Terry Morgan, Heidi May being the end of July, where they talked about challenges and pressures, and as is often the case, there are scenarios. What was not told to us then was there'd be a delay till August 2019. What we didn't have then was the piece of work that TfL commissioned. TfL, before that meeting that I had already commissioned this piece of work that came to fruition end of August at the special Crossrail board meeting organised. And just for completeness, neither Heidi or I sit on the Crossrail board. There are separate members from DFT and TfL who do, but it's an autonomous setup.
I think we can accept, Mr. Mayor, that you were not aware that there would be a 9-month delay until around the 29th of August. I think we can accept that. The question, though, is were you aware there was the potential for any kind of a delay prior to that 29th date?
I think it'd be fair to say one of the scenarios, and there's often different scenarios, one of the scenarios probably was delay, but nobody talked about that's not. Crossrail Limited weren't saying that scenario is going to happen, and Crossrail Limited weren't saying that scenario would lead to a delay from December till August, and until the work commissioned by TfL was done, we weren't aware of that.
So you were not aware of any potential delay at all until...
No. One of the scenarios that we were given was probably some delay, but that wasn't the scenario that Crossrail Limited envisaged would happen. You often get given different scenarios and timelines and stuff. Crossrail Limited were confident, and they've been confident throughout, that the central section of Crossrail would open in December 2018. And the only time where that's moved back to August 2019 is in the late August meeting that I referred to.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is challenging your belief that, or challenging your word that it wasn't until that late date that you were aware there was going to be a 9-month delay. But the question is that you were aware there was the potential for a delay, but you didn't know how long it was going to be.
No, but it's even further than that. Crossrail Limited weren't saying there was going to be a delay even in July. What I'm saying to you is one of the scenarios is always, would have been then, I'm not going to talk in here, would have been, there's a possibility of there being a delay. That's not what Crossrail Limited was saying. But it's because TfL wanted some assurance that they asked for this additional work to be commissioned. The additional work was commissioned, I think, in July, around that time. We can give the exact date. And that's what reported back in August, that actually said that what Crossrail Limited was saying wasn't quite the case, and actually the December 2018 date wasn't going to be met. And to be fair, it was the Crossrail board meeting, the extra meeting in August, where that was presented, and it was, I think, either after that meeting or around that time when I was told about the delay to August 2019.
You see, the issue here, Mr. Mayor, is that you are claiming that you, or on the 26th of September at the plenary meeting, you were saying that you were not aware of any delays until the 29th. But even from what you're saying, there clearly was a potential for a delay, and clearly you were aware of that.
I think we're talking about cross purposes. There's the advice given to us by Crossrail up until August, the end of August, was the central section, according to them, was going to be ready by December 2018. That doesn't exclude the possibility of there being a delay. That wasn't their advice. It's because of the concerns TfL had in July that the additional piece of work was commissioned that reported back towards the end of August.
And did TfL share those, or your Deputy Mayor share those concerns with you? You were aware, Mr. Mayor, that there were concerns about this delay, or the potential for a delay.
And the report that was commissioned could have reported back at the end of August and said, you know what, Crossrail Limited are correct, it will open in December 2018, we've done this piece of work, but you can be reassured it's going to be open in 2018, December. That's not what it said, but it's possible it could have said that. And you'll remember the evidence given by the Chief Executive and the Chair, that they themselves had people looking into, separately, independent, inverted commas, looking into their work, and they were giving them the reassurance that they would be able to meet the timeline. So it is possible that the work commissioned by TfL could have come back at the end of August and said, you know what, Crossrail Limited are right, it's going to open in, the central section will open in December 2018, albeit one or two stations may not be completely finished. There was concern around Bond Street Station, but again, one of the resolutions was to have some of the exits working and some of the exits closed off so they could carry on doing the improvements to Bond Street Station. So again, that was one of the things that could have been said.
You see, Mr. Mayor, where I'm trying to get to, I'm trying to be helpful in a way. Well, you probably don't accept that, but you see, I'm just trying to establish whether you deliberately or inadvertently misled the Assembly on the 26th of September. Now, I think you have to accept that from what you're saying, that you had knowledge of a potential delay. And on the 26th of September, you said you weren't aware until the 29th. But clearly, from what you've been saying, it's clear you were aware. So I've got to ask you, did you deliberately, or was it because the way you're arguing now, did you deliberately or did you inadvertently mislead the Assembly?
I'm not sure if I accept the premise of your question in relation to what we knew and didn't know. What I'm saying is, I'm quite clear. The first time I was told the central section wasn't going to open in December 2018 and would be opening in autumn 2019 was towards the end of August. We can give you the exact date. I think I gave it in my session. Crossrail Limited weren't saying to me, and I'm sure to the Deputy Mayor, in July or before then, we're not going to make December 2018. Let's start planning for December, autumn 2019. It was because of the work commissioned by TfL in around June, July, I think July, that we got the results back in August, which was independent verification of the position. And so it's distinguishing the advice given by Crossrail Limited and the advice given by the work commissioned by TfL.
You know, I fully accept, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely believe that nobody said to you until the 29th of August, I think that was the date, it's not going to happen. You know, and we have examples.
I think to be fair, your question before was, did I mislead? I think to be fair to me, your previous question was, did I advertently or inadvertently mislead the Assembly?
Yeah, exactly.
You just said now, nobody suggesting, so...
No. I'm saying that I'm agreeing with you that you didn't know absolutely 100% certain until that date. But from everything the evidence you're giving, you clearly did know something. So when you made that statement, you were possibly inadvertently misleading because you didn't recall that you'd already had a lot of knowledge that there was a potential for delay. No, I mean, I think it's just worth understanding, and this was discussed at length at the TfL board meeting in open session subsequently as well as previously. Throughout the course of this project, often the Crossrail come and say we've got these challenges, there are these pressures.
and I give them credit for having a can-do attitude and trying to rectify them. So you'll be aware of the problems around the west end of Crossrail, some of the stations. You'll be aware about Bond Street. And there'll be other problems along the course. So simply because Crossrail Limited have said there's a challenge or a pressure doesn't lead to the conclusion it's going to be delayed. And to be fair to the current chief exec and the previous one, and to the chair, they didn't say, and they would say to themselves, that there's going to be delay. What they were always saying, and this is an optimism bias of engineers, is we can find a solution. What I'm saying to you is, one of the scenarios in July may well have been the potential of delay, but all the advice we receive from Crossrail is that will materialise. We'll then make sure we get the December 2018 open, albeit with some issues around Bond Street, and we can work out Bond Street and stuff. But the central section will be open. It was only when we received the work commissioned by TfL as one of the joint sponsors in August was the recommendation from Crossrail changed, and they said, actually, you know what, we won't open in December 2018, we're now looking at autumn 2019.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Mayor, can you confirm that you are accountable for Metropolitan Police Officer numbers?
As even by accountable, 80% of our funding
No. I'm just asking a yes or no question here. Are you actually accountable for the amount of police officers we have? I think you find the answer should be yes.
Well, Chair, I can't answer a question in a yes or no
It's a simple question, Mr. Mayor. Are you accountable or are you not? Yes or no?
Well, Chair, the way it works is 80% of our funding comes from
the way it
central
works
government.
is I ask you a question and it's a yes or no question and you answer. The answer to this actually is yes. So if I go on to the next question, when did you first announce the extra £5 million to recruit more police officers? Shall I help you with the answer to that? It was the 22nd of February. When did the boost to police recruitment begin? Yep, I'll help you with that as well. That was 26th of September. So that was 7 months after you announced the money to recruit more police officers. Do you think that's acceptable?
Is that for me?
Yeah, you might be able to answer this one. Do you think it's acceptable? And that's a yes or no as well.
Well, Chair, if I could explain. The way it works is 80% of the money...
Here we go. I'm just asking simple questions, Mr. Mayor, and I would like just simple answers to simple questions. If not, you'll filibust through the rest of our time.
Do you think you could do this in sort of bite-sized pieces, Mr. Mayor? I think the very first question was, is it you who is accountable for the number of police?
And the answer, Chair, is that 80% of our funding comes from central government.
Okay.
And so,
yes.
And so what happens is a combination of central government money and monies from London Council taxpayers. It provides the budget for the MPs, including special grants we may apply for. And that helps us decide on police numbers based on the advice we receive from the Commissioner, who's in charge of operational matters.
So you're...
right.
Forgive me, I'm trying to make it easier for both of you. Are you saying that the government is accountable for 80% of police numbers?
80% of funding, correct.
Okay. Does that help?
Okay. You put an extra £5 million in on the 22nd of February, and the boost to police recruitment began on the 26th of September. Do you accept that?
No. If I can explain, Chair. When it comes to recruiting police officers, it takes, roughly speaking, 9 months to recruit police officers. And the police officers each month lose a significant number of police officers on natural turnover. So because of the last few years there been no real recruitment over and above filling vacancies for those who've left below the decline we've had, the Met Police Service hasn't had the expertise to recruit a big number of officers. We've had to scale up the recruiting department of the MPS. Some of this is outsourced. And so I was able to announce earlier this year, as a consequence of me raising the council tax precept, and also contributing money from business rates, additional money for the MPS. Some of this they simply couldn't spend this year, so it was used to pay off some capital, and the interest payments were used to do with, for example, mental health practitioners giving advice in basic command units. And the time in the interim has allowed them to build up their teams to recruit the officers we so desperately need?
Mr Mayor, we do desperately need officers. In February, when you announced the £5 million going in, we had 31,000. You were tweeting in July that the police numbers could go below 30,000, which of course you knew they would because the August figures showed that they dropped to 29,666. But in August, we've got a freedom of information from MOPAC stating that there is enough money in the budget for 30,750. Yet you spend your life blaming the government and everybody else for lack of police numbers. The point is you put money in February for extra police numbers and they've only just started to recruit in September. Do you think that is acceptable?
Well, Chair, again, can I just explain, because obviously there's a misunderstanding here. So each month, roughly speaking, 200 officers leave the police service. Sometimes goes up to 300.
No, we all know that.
So the numbers are going to go down every month if there's no recruitment anyway. So what's been happening is we recruit at least 200 to 300 every month just to fill the amounts we're losing. Now, the idea is not to go below 30,000 if we can, but I feared, and it materialised, we weren't below 30,000. We invested more money in recruiting police officers, but it takes time to build up the recruitment to the levels over and above the 200 to 300 to show the increase from the dip below 30,000. And it takes 9 months to recruit a police officer, and the Assembly will have seen the huge recruitment drive this autumn as we are now trying to see more officers join the Met Police Service.
I think the figures you're throwing out are being misleading. If you've given money in February, £5 million for recruitment, which we were all around this table very, very happy about, the fact that it took 7 months for you to get your act together to start recruiting then, and then they've got to be trained, is totally unacceptable for the people of London. You only have to look at the crime going up and up and up to realise that you should have got your act together in February when you announced that extra money. Well, Chair, I'll leave it there, Chair.
What I find astonishing is, again, a misunderstanding. The amount announced in February was for the new financial year which began in April. So as it is, it shows an amazing lack of understanding about how the budgets work. But secondly, Chair, what you can't allow, surely, as an impartial, fair chair, is a misleading untruth, pretending to be a question made by an Assembly member when we've seen over the last few years London losing £700 million of money from central government and a further 300 million over the next 2 years, notwithstanding that this Mayor is invested in policing.
Mr Mayor, seeking to flatter me about my objectivity does not give you licence to go off on one about...
I was being sarcastic, Chair.
Lack of government.
I wasn't flattering you, I was being sarcastic.
Well, let's go on now, please, to Assembly Member Bacon.
Mr Mayor, who was accountable for the decision to approve the now famous Trump balloon?
Somebody in City Hall.
Somebody at City Hall.
There's a team that does this.
On the 19th of July, when you were questioned on the same subject by Assemblymember Curtin, you implied that the decision was an independent one, as you've just done now, taken by officers without outside interference. Do you stand by that?
It's taken by I think it's operations team. I think it's the name of the team, but yeah, it's taken by operations team, not by me.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, this is a file of emails that was obtained under Freedom of Information request, and in it there is an email exchange which took place on the 27th of April between the man who planned to fly the blimp and the GLA events and lettings team. In which and they were requesting permission to fly the blimp. And the final email from the GLA Events and Lettings team reads as follows. In the first instance, no inflatables of any kind would be permitted in Parliament Square as stated below at any time. To clarify, we are potentially dealing with tens of thousands of people in the area on Whitehall in either the 13th or 14th of July. Therefore, to be clear, we cannot consider the inflatable request below and the decision is final. Would you agree that that sounds conclusive?
From what you've read, it's the first time I'm hearing it, and taking the Chair's advice that I should accept as truth and gospel everything read out. I accept that you're reading that.
If you doubt it, I'm more than happy to send you the email after this exchange. So the FOI also reveals that nothing much happened after that email until an article appeared on the 15th of June in The Guardian. The article was written by the man who offered to fly the blimp, and it was headed, "Come on, Sadiq Khan, let our Trump baby blimp fly over London." And the article continued in a similar vein. That's the article there, which you're welcome to have. What was your reaction to that article?
I can't remember. There's been lots of articles about this balloon.
Well, on the same day that the Guardian article appeared, there was a flurry of emails between the Director of External and International Affairs, your Director of Political and Public Affairs, your Director of Communications, and your Director of Policy. And the email exchanges lasted 12 days and included discussions of how to reverse the original decision, the wording of an apology to the event organiser, and press lines for you to use. The exchanges concluded with an email from your Director of International Affairs and others stating, I think we might need to lean into this a bit more now. Can you draft something along the lines of us looking at how we can make this happen? And the following day, an email was sent from the City Operations Lead in your office to the Head of Facilities Management of the GLA telling him, we are minded to grant the permission and it would be good to get an outline of the next steps so we can approve this sooner rather than later. Do you deny knowledge that those exchanges took place?
I do, yeah. You
do deny that? How interesting. Mr. Mayor, the people I've referred to are your political appointees. They are your inner circle. Do you really expect people to believe they did all of this without your sanction?
Well, the decision was taken by the operations team. I wasn't privy to the decision. I'm not aware of the emails. The emails you're reading out are the first time I'm hearing about them.
So you're trying to persuade the Assembly that people that are your inner circle, and everyone in this room knows that they are your inner circle, are doing this without any of your knowledge?
I think with respect, you're trying to persuade us that is within my knowledge rather than me persuading the room.
So you're denying any accountability for this talk. I would have thought you would be proud of this, Mr. Mayor, given your track history with the President of the United States. I mean, I've got no candle for the President of the United States. I'm on record repeatedly as thinking he's slightly a buffoon. But I'm interested in the accountability of decision-making at City Hall. So why are you denying any accountability for this at all?
The decision on whether it's the blimp of myself or the President of the United States or anybody else, the decision taken by the operations team, subject to the criteria that there is lawful, peaceful, safe, and all those sorts of things.
But you said they were independent and the decision was taken without any outside pressure. And I've just demonstrated to you, and there are emails that back this up.
I think what I said was they're not decision taken by me, taken by the operations team. I think actually the phrase I used was others inside City Hall, and then it was put to me by you who the team were, and I accept that.
You said you were not involved in the decision making at all. So do your directors not act in your...
You said I was not involved in the decision making.
Okay, well, it's quite interesting that it seems that your directors make decisions on your behalf without your sanction. That's an interesting governance arrangement, isn't it?
Well, I wasn't involved in the decision making of the balloon.
Are you involved in any decision making at City Hall, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Chair, you see, this is the problem when you're being such a great impartial chair. And that's what I meant by my sarcasm. Because the question is, do I make any decisions? And of course I make lots of decisions in this administration. The proposition being put to me is I was responsible for permission being granted for the balloon of Donald Trump. I've said quite clear on a number of occasions I wasn't responsible. It was others in this building that made the decision. The Assembly member is making the point that I should be proud of this decision. My point is, of course I like taking credit for things that are extremely popular. I'm afraid I can't take credit for this one.
Mr. Mayor, you are the Mayor of London, which means that the buck stops with you. And from exchanges that we've had in here this morning, it is blatantly apparent that you've been misleading people about housing targets and strategies and numbers. You've given some very flaky answers around police numbers, and you've even been misleading people about something as trivial as about who took the decision about flying a balloon in Parliament Square. Why should Londoners believe anything that you're saying?
Chair, I'm sure you'll allow me to answer that question because 4 separate propositions have been put to me. Even you will allow me to answer that question, Chair, which is in relation to police numbers. I've been quite clear that notwithstanding the massive cuts made by central government, I'll do my bit by our police. I'm pro-police, unlike this government. That's why I've invested record amounts. It's not £5 million.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not asking a question about
I'm really sorry.
You just dealt with the police thing.
I'm really sorry,
Go to
Chair.
the next one.
I'm really sorry, Chair. What was put to me is that I've given flaky numbers on housing.
The question that I asked him,
on
Mr.
police
Chairman, was
numbers,
why anyone should believe anything he says.
And that's
the question he needs to answer.
No argument between the two of you on this. You asked if you could answer the point on the policing. You did, and now you sought to expand that.
I'm really sorry, Chair. Even you've got to accept he also raised flaky housing numbers.
Yes.
Deal with that one. Well, let me deal with the housing numbers.
Yeah.
No, he's dealt with that
Last year, we began a record number of genuinely affordable homes in this city.
Chairman. This is a waste of time.
And we also began a record numbers of social rented homes. They're not flaky numbers. They are real numbers.
Okay, you've dealt with that one. Was there another one
There
you
was.
wanted to
He
rebut?
also raised the issue of the balloon.
The question was why anyone should
He
believe
also
the
raised
word
the
that he
issue
says,
of
because
the
he's
balloon
clearly
chair.
not telling the truth.
And in relation to the balloon, I've been quite clear. I wasn't responsible for permission being granted to the balloon of myself or of President Trump. He also raised the issue about transport. And so let me deal with the issue of transport. I've been quite clear that in relation to the decision to delay the opening of central section of Crossrail from December 2018 to autumn 2019,
Chairman,
I wasn't aware until the end of August.
This is filibustering on the highest order.
Again, you've now dealt with that. If I can endeavour to bring some order into this, you are quite clear, Mr. Mayor, as I've heard it. You took no part in the decision to fly the balloon. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
Okay.
That is not the question I asked, Chairman.
Okay,
We're
well,
out of time. Thank you.
Is that it? Is he out of time? You have time. You have time.
No,
you finished.
Chairman, he's out of ideas, Chair, and out of questions.
No.
And that's the problem. We have pre-scripted questions written by researchers, Chair. That's why you should think for yourself.
Assembly Member Pigeon has a question on 999 calls.
Thank you, Chair. Responding to emergency calls is a fundamental and vital responsibility of the Met Police, and Londoners expect that in a time of need, help will be there in time. The challenges facing London and the Met are not to be taken lightly. Funding cuts to London means that the Met must deliver its services with fewer officers, the lowest number since 2003, and the lowest per head of population in 20 years. This without taking into consideration the huge number of visitors our city has adding to our daily population. The Met primary focus is on responding to emergency calls, I-grade or immediate grade, calls within 15 minutes. These calls are those in which Londoners need urgent help. The latest data shows that the Met has achieved this in 86% of responses. Both I and the Commissioner want this to be even higher. The Met's own target is to respond to 90% of immediate calls within 15 minutes. Immediate call response performance has been relatively stable over the past few years, with a figure of 86% of calls responded to within 15 minutes reported back in April 2016, despite a significant increase in 999 calls. In August 2018, there were over 195,000 emergency 999 calls compared to, in April 2018, 149,000 calls. Increase in 999 call demand is a challenge that police forces across the country are having to deal with. I know there were some specific problems with response times when the new BCU model was rolled out in Camden and Islington, BCU Central North, and in Barking and Dagenham, Haver and Redbridge, BCU East. The performance then wasn't good enough. I'm pleased to say that it has now improved to the levels before the BCU model came in. BCU Central North now is on 94% of immediate calls responded to within 15 minutes. I'm also aware there have been delays in answering 101 calls. The Met have assured me that they are working hard to improve this by recruiting additional staff to help deal with the rise in demand, an increase that has been observed not just in the Met but across the country. There is ongoing work across the Met to maintain and improve the emergency response services to Londoners. This includes ensuring the closest vehicle is always dispatched to the call, reviewing the number of emergency response drivers in each operational team, and ensuring that the most appropriate response is provided to each caller according to their needs and the level of risk.
Okay, thank you for that. But looking at the emergency response times for the second highest priority calls, these are significant calls. We know the Met has a 60-minute maximum target to respond to these calls, but in June, the average was over 64 minutes across the whole of London, with some boroughs over 2 hours. Is this acceptable?
Well, I think what isn't acceptable is using a metric of measurement that the police don't use. So what the police use as a metric of measurement is numbers of calls responded within 60 minutes. So calls that are not an immediate priority are graded as S significant. The Met aims to respond to 90% of S calls within 60 minutes. The latest data towards the end of August shows that 80% of S calls were responded to within 60 minutes. This is 4 percentage points higher than the previous month, July, which was 76%. The Met is quite rightly focusing on immediate calls, as these are the urgent calls that require immediate attention. And both the Commissioner and I want to get the significant calls that responded within 60 minutes higher than they currently are.
But these are figures that I got from you in a mayoral answer. And in June, the average response time in Redbridge is 1 hour 45 minutes. In Wandsworth, 1 hour 49. In Newham, 1 hour 51. Are you happy that someone who has been the victim of, say, hate crime, a burglary or a road collision in Barking and Dagenham could be waiting over 2 hours for the police to show up? Does it concern you?
I'm not happy at all if people who need the help of the police aren't receiving this, but it's worth reminding the Assembly that as a consequence of the cuts made by central government, by the way, was a Conservative Lib Dem government, we've had major cuts in police resources. The priority of the police must be officer numbers, also dealing with the 999 immediate calls. You'll appreciate there's been some concerns in relation to the increase in 999 calls that the police are receiving. Given a choice, with finite resources facing massive cuts on dealing with one-on-one calls or significant calls or dealing with the immediate calls, I don't criticise the police for dealing with the immediate calls. As I've said, for parts of London, that's now 94% within 15 minutes. I've given you the figures in relation to the most recent calls for significant. It's not good enough that it's 80% within 60 minutes when the Met aims to respond to 90% of calls within 60 minutes. The Met are recruiting more call handlers. Over the past 6 months, the number of vacancies has fallen from 270 to 130, and these measures have increased the ability of the police to respond. But of course, I'm not happy that anybody who needs the help of the police isn't receiving the help of police, even if it's not immediate. People still want a police officer within 60 minutes.
Absolutely. Now, I'm pleased you said that there are additional staff being recruited, but one thing that all of these boroughs with appalling response times have in common is they are where your police mergers have gone live. And last year you explicitly said that the emergency response times would be used to monitor the success of your police borough mergers. Clearly they are not a success, and given this poor response times. Can you give a guarantee to Londoners today that as your borough mergers continue to be rolled out, there will be no further fall in response times?
Well, again, the problem, Chair, of asking a question where the question is based on false premises is wrong, because I've given the example. I've given you the example of the BCU in the north, Camden Islington, where 94% of calls are being responded to that are immediate calls within 50 minutes. 94%. The aim is for 90%. You've said in your question that actually what this demonstrates, and I'm paraphrasing, is that the BCUs have a poor response time. I've given you the evidence, which is that isn't the case. I'm quite clear.
Okay, no, you're out of
I'm quite
time,
clear
Assembly Member.
that we need to make sure that members of the public receive a swifter response. I'm not going to apologise for investing in the immediate calls, and it's really important we continue to do so.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Assembly Member Eshalomi, Brexit and Transport.
Thank you, Chair. A no-deal Brexit should be unthinkable, but we're now in real danger of it becoming a reality. Any kind of Brexit could result in fewer jobs, less prosperity, and a reduced role for Britain on the world stage, but it could also negatively impact our transport services. As the National Audit Office has confirmed to Parliament, there would be an immediate stop on flights in and out of the UK if we end up with a no-deal Brexit. Barriers to trade, tourism and business will also clearly have an impact on demand for public transport within London. Forget no deal, even a bad Brexit would reduce transport fare revenues and could create financial difficulties for Transport for London. TfL is therefore modelling the potential impact of different Brexit scenarios through this year's TfL business planning process. It's important to note that the European Investment Bank is a very important source of borrowing for TfL, enabling it to invest in Crossrail, London Overground, London Underground and the DLR. TfL is currently borrowing £3.3 billion from the European Investment Bank, which provides more flexibility, more certainty and lower interest rates than other sources. Of the £3.3 billion currently being borrowed by TfL, the oldest outstanding loan goes back to 2006. However, TfL doesn't expect to be able to borrow from the EIB after March 2019, and that's why I'm calling on the government to ensure an equivalent borrowing facility is open to TfL. In terms of the people who run London's transport system and construct and maintain the infrastructure, TfL estimates that around 1,600 staff and contractors are EU citizens. TfL is monitoring access to scarce skills and the risk of wage inflation pressures dependent on the type of Brexit. It's also reviewing the resilience of its supply chain. I'm determined to make sure we're as prepared as possible in London in case of a no-deal Brexit, including our transport services. And I know that TfL is working hard to develop contingency plans for all these issues, and that more detail will be available when the business plan is published later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll definitely be looking out for that business plan. It's good to see that TfL are monitoring that. One of the things that I've picked up on, and I'm sure you have as well, and other colleagues, when you're speaking to TfL staff, the range of them from different EU nationality backgrounds. In a written reply to my colleague, Assembly Member Dismore, in February 2017, you said that TfL don't actually collect the data of where the staff members from the EU citizens are from. I think in light of that, you know, a no Brexit deal would have a massive impact on these people. Do you think that TfL should start actually maybe thinking it's a priority to look at where any, and if any, EU citizens they employ?
So TfL estimate, and it's an estimation, I can't give you the assurance that it's concise, but there are 1,600 staff and contractors who are EU citizens. The workforce of TfL, of permanent staff, put aside contractors, is roughly speaking 27,000. You're right, it would be easier if we had specific numbers. So what the aim over the next period is to make sure we give the advice in relation to the stuff from online portal, but also government's policies around government settlement scheme, other issues, to TfL staff, including contractors, and try and make sure it reaches those TfL staff who need it the most, in other words, EU citizens. But you're right, we've got to make sure across London, not just TfL, that all Londoners who are EU citizens understand what's coming around the corner.
That would be good, and if we could get some figures. The other thing that I was concerned about is the fact that you may be aware that TfL's ability to actually pay some of those staff, and some of them who may require a two-tier visa. So the requirement for that is that you have to be earning over 30,000. What proportion of TfL staff currently earn under 30,000, and what would happen if they can't get a visa?
Just to remind colleagues that the way the government's recommendations and the MAC, the advisory committee, sort of endorsed this was for tier 2 of 30,000 they get a better system. Those who aren't tier 2 below 30,000, there's a less good system. Of the staff we have, we think 13% earn less than £30,000 per annum. These 13% are crucial to the operations of TfL, and you can sort of calculate what percentage of those would be non-Brits, EU citizens, or others. And clearly, if it's the case that tier 2 is given priority, that has a huge knock-on effect on our ability to run an effective transport system. That's one of the reasons why I'll be responding to the government's white paper, and one of the reasons why I'm so unhappy with the recommendations made by MAC.
No, and just lastly, Mr. Mayor, you alluded to the work of the business planning group, and you touched on some of the issues and things that TfL has in terms of contracts and borrowing. The other big one is around services that and a future relationship with the EU. Have TfL started to identify, one, what services we buy from the EU, and two, what services we sell? Because essentially, if we don't have the single market, that could have a big impact on future contracts.
Well, I mean, look, can I just you've articulated one of the problems with all those who were talking about the glory days once we left the European Union. If it's the case that our regulatory framework is different to the EU, how can we sell them our stuff? If it's the case that the services we do, which is frictionless trade, with the EU, and we're not members of the single market, how can we carry on trading with them in the same way we are? This is a huge source of concern, not just to TfL, but other businesses across London. And by the way, the Chequers plan, let's assume for argument's sake, in some sort of parallel universe, the Conservative Party accept the Chequers plan. The Chequers plan was only about frictionless trade for goods, completely omitted to mention services. 90% of our economy in London is services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Whittle, Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. London's incredible creative energy has made our city a leading capital for innovation, business and culture. This has developed over time and is built upon strong foundations. Our legal system is world-renowned and instills confidence in investors. Our regulation is fair and our tax rates competitive. London's opportunities, its culture and now even its food make it a hugely attractive place for the world's leading businesses and talented people. That's why I've maintained since the referendum that despite the challenges of Brexit, London's appeal as a place to do business will endure. But we can't ignore that Brexit has created uncertainty about London's future. I launched the London is Open campaign to showcase to the world that the capital remains as open to international talent, trade and investment. I've led delegations from our international business programme, forging new business links and banging the drum for London. I've also provided additional funding to London and partners to expand significantly its overseas footprint in 5 additional key markets of Paris, Berlin, Bangalore, Shenzhen and Chicago. Of course, I welcome the recently announced investment by Chanel and also welcome Unilever's decision to keep its headquarters in London. And though I understand it won't mean any changes to the operations here, we welcome RELX Group choosing London as a home for its new consolidated parent company. However, when looking at the possible impacts of Brexit on London, it would be foolish to look at recent investments in isolation. And it's important to remember that we've not actually left the EU yet. There's no doubt that the economic damage of a mismanaged Brexit would be hard felt by a large number of London's key sectors who rely on trade with the EU. Thousands of jobs in the financial services sector alone could be forced to move to the continent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for that answer, which is almost exactly as I imagined it would be. Mr. Mayor, you'd agree that this is Mayor's question time, wouldn't you? Yes? And you'd agree that basically in order for it to actually work as it should, there are various conventions that people should undertake and basically should agree to have a proper discussion. I hope you'd agree with that. I take your silence to mean that you would. You might also possibly agree that many people in the audience won't know that time is allotted under a different system, so we have very little time. So I want to use it, with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, if I can, to make some form of point of order. I want a retraction and apology from you, basically for defaming the integrity of my party and, more importantly, my colleagues. Using words like Nazi, using words like dictatorship.
Be quiet.
No, I will not be quiet.
Be quiet.
They use their time to attack us.
You must seek to deal with this by way of a question. You could ask the Mayor, does he agree with what the Assembly member said about?
Oh, that's really going to be productive, isn't it, Mr. Chairman?
That way you get your message over.
I have to use the time I have, and I will not stand by and have that kind of slander in this place. We play by the rules here, and we always have. You should too. I want you to apologise to my friend for using words like Nazi and dictatorship and all the rest of it. So you might not agree with us, but the fact is that is
Assembly Member Whittle, if you're going to make a complaint through the formal channels. I think everybody has already accepted. Everybody has already accepted that you have a complaint about what the Assembly member said. We've all heard that. Now, put that through the proper machinery. You are now wasting all of our time by not seeking to ask the Mayor, and you're the one who's just made
I asked the Mayor from the word
question. Is that it?
Yeah.
You're going to make a complaint through the formal channels. Is that how you're going to deal with the matter?
It wasn't dealt with in the way maybe it should have been at the time, so maybe that's what I should do.
Okay, thanks very much. Assembly Member Duval, food after Brexit.
Of those on the other side. Handbags and perfume, I'm very pleased I can be able to buy those in a post-Brexit future. Will I be able to eat, Mr. Mayor? And and in terms of the concerns that I have, and the question I want to pose to you, is about the stockpiling of food that the government is planning to do. And they've even appointed a Minister for Overseas Supplies of Food. So in light of the Stena Line announcement this morning, and along with that food prices are likely to rise when the UK leaves the EU, particularly in a no-deal scenario, are you planning to meet the new Minister? And what discussions, when will you be meeting about discussions of food supply for Londoners?
Chair, can I just in beginning my answer to the Assembly member's question, make the point that 30% of UK's food comes directly from the EU. Another 11% arrives under EU deals with third countries outside the EU. Now, there is a distinct possibility that we will leave the EU very shortly without a transitional deal, and that should cause concern to not just Londoners but those across the country. And it's obvious that lengthy delays at EU and UK borders, especially for fresh food, will put enormous pressure on our restaurants, supermarkets and families on the lowest income. So my officials already are speaking to government officials. Fiona Twycross is chairing an important piece of work around our resilience as a city. So in addition to the concerns raised by Dr. Sahota around medicines, in addition to the concerns raised by Unmesh Desai around security, you're right, actually, as the basic thing is food should be a huge source of concern to us moving forward. And by the way, they didn't talk about this during the campaign, to leave the European Union, and that's what we're left with.
Thank you.
Okay. The next question is withdrawn, the question on spit guards, and we now go to Assembly Member Shah's question on post-Brexit immigration.
Thank you, Chair. London's success is built on a combination of top homegrown talent and the fact that so many talented people from around the world have chosen to come here to contribute their skills to our economy. All of the business leaders I've spoken to since the referendum have stressed the importance of maintaining London's access to talent after Brexit. Many believe that new restrictions on their ability to recruit the right range of skills from Europe is one of the biggest Brexit risks they face. That's why I was so disappointed with the recent report into post-Brexit immigration by the Migration Advisory Committee, MAC. The MAC's recommendations would not do enough to protect London's access to talent following the hard Brexit that took us out of the single market. The MAC has not fully considered the strong contribution of European workers in London's construction sector, nor other important sectors. Those workers perform a vital role in ensuring London continues as a world-leading city. The MAC's approach risks creating major skills shortage in London, which should be a severe detriment to our economy. Given those major concerns about the MAC report, I don't welcome the indications from the government that they plan to take forward some of the key recommendations in their upcoming immigration white paper. My office is currently working closely with London's business community to determine how we should respond. What's vitally important is that we protect our access to international talent. And the three big things that we'll be doing is making sure we use the devolution of adult education to make sure we shape the skills agenda to address the issues and concerns caused. Secondly, we'll be launching a £71 million European Social Fund programme, and this includes a sector-based approach to support Londoners in areas that are set to be affected significantly by Brexit. And thirdly, the new Construction Academy and Digital Talent programme, which are already been delivered, need to make sure we focus on those skills shortages caused by the hard Brexit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The government's current approach seems to be towards allowing highly skilled workers only post-Brexit. Now, you mentioned in one of the earlier responses that there's something like 100,000 EU construction workers within the sector in London. Now, what economic impact there will be post-Brexit on catering and construction industries, for example, which rely on generally low-skilled workers or workers who will not qualify high-skilled workers, kind of that definition, the immigration policies which government might promote?
I mean, some of these jobs are jobs that are essential for the running of our city. You mentioned hotels, restaurants, hospitality, construction, social care. A lot of these jobs don't pay 30,000 or more. They pay below 30,000, so they won't qualify for Tier 2. And the idea that we would be without these workers in London as a consequence of an extreme hard Brexit is causing the business community huge concern. We've recently surveyed the business community on a diverse range of businesses, and they're extremely worried about the consequences of an extreme hard Brexit, the obligations that will be placed upon them. You'll have seen reports in the media about some farmers not planting certain crops because they won't be able to have the fruit pickers they need when it comes to the relevant season. So it's a real source of concern.
Yeah. Last question, Mr. Mayor. Are you lobbying? You mentioned the training program, etc. Have you lobbied government to establish some form of emergency program for training to replace the skills lost through declining inward migration?
Well, some people might say that you asking the question is scaremongering, but hold on a sec. If we have an extreme hard Brexit with no transition, from March 2019 we could be out with certain people. So you're right to ask the question. Our officials are talking to the government about the need of an emergency programme. That's one of the things that Fiona Twycross's Resilience Forum will be looking into. Our officials are talking about whether there'll be a need. We're hoping still at this 11th hour we won't have a nodal situation or an extreme hard deal without transition, but we've got to start planning for that now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Grateful for that.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Mr. Mayor, I want to return back to the issue of Brexit and the NHS. We were told that we will get £350 million extra of the NHS, and that won't happen. What we weren't told was that the nurses, the social carers, and the doctors from the EU will be leaving us. 1 in 10 NHS staff are from the EU. Is there any sign that this government understands the need for Brexit, that the Brexit deal should preserve the co-recognition of qualifications across us and in Europe?
Well, so far, there's no good news to tell you. You'll be aware there was semblance of good news in relation to the temporary exemption of doctors and nurses from the Tier 2 cap, only temporary exemption. It's still the case. We've got record numbers of empty nursing vacancies in London. It's still the case that NHS doctors are worried about the consequence of us leaving the EU. And you're right to remind us, things like recognition of qualifications would be affected and jeopardised by an extreme hard Brexit or no deal. And you'll be aware from colleagues of yours in the NHS, yes, whether they're doctors, nurses or others, radiographers or others, who may have qualifications in the EU, and the co-recognition means we can work there and they can work here. Again, another example of if there's no alignment of regulations or recognition, the consequence could be pretty dire.
Yes, thank you, Mr. The Department of Health's response to the government's consultation on the migration after Brexit underlined the vital contribution of the EA workers. Yet the government's new system keeps the 30,000 minimum salary requirement, which shuts out nurses, social care workers and pharmacists. What can you do to mitigate the impact that this will have on health and social care in London?
So the practical thing we're going to do is respond to the government's white paper, which is out shortly. As I said, I'm disappointed. The government appears to be accepting the MAC recommendations. You're right. I mean, people who work in the NHS don't do it for the money. Quite clearly they don't, because a lot of them that you're talking about who are crucial earn below £30,000. If the government sticks with a Tier 2 priority at the expense of those who aren't receiving £30,000, at a time we know there aren't people here who will do the social care work, who will do the nursing work, who will do the hospitality work that Navin Shah referred to. These will be vacancies that will affect businesses and our ability to be a thriving city. And I'm genuinely concerned about the consequences of either a bad deal or no deal. One of the reasons why I'll be marching tomorrow to try and persuade the government to give the public a say on choosing whether we accept the negotiations done by the government or we stay in the European Union.
And finally, the official Migration Advisory Committee report on Brexit says the reason we rely on social workers from Europe is because they are so low paid in the sector. The report says that cuts to councils have made this even worse. What can you do to help develop the social care workforce while we wait for the government to come to its senses and start making real investment that's needed in the NHS?
Well, that's one of the things I found astonishing about the MAC report. They must have known surely that one of the reasons why local authorities are having to make cutbacks and not being able to pay social care staff the amounts they'd like to is because of cuts imposed by central government. They might not like it when I talk about central government cuts, but that's the reality. And so for the MAC to make the recommendation, well, if you simply pay them more, you either get above 30,000 or you get more people applying for these jobs, it's not realistic in the context of the cuts we've seen. Now, if it is the case that the Prime Minister was being honest when she said the time of austerity is over, what you'd expect in the budget that takes place in the next couple of weeks is an announcement from the Chancellor of huge investment in local authorities, huge investment in the NHS, huge investment in skills training that will allow us to pay Brits, in the words of the MAC committee, the wages that some of these people deserve. I doubt it.
Let's wait and see. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assembly Member Berry's question is on women's centres in London.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. In March 2018, I announced funding of £4.8 million for services to support the rehabilitation of female offenders in the community. This includes investment to maintain London's 2 existing women's centres, in addition to funding a new centre from 2019. I've welcomed the committee's report, which is a significant examination of provision for female offenders in London. Central government has done too little in this area since the publication of Baroness Jean Corson's report over 10 years ago. The sudden closure of HMP Holloway has removed key resources for the rehabilitation of women offenders in London, and there is yet to be any real investment of any savings back into London. Female offenders are low volume, but they have high levels of vulnerability, and there is strong evidence showing that investment in women's centres and specialist provision can have a significant impact on reducing reoffending. Our police and crime plan includes effective diversion and community intervention as a key commitment. Since its publication, I've committed over £5 million to support the rehabilitation of female offenders in London, including £4.6 million investment in the existing women's centres and a new women's centre, and a further £0.5 million has been committed for services to support police diversion. In contrast, the government, who have a statutory responsibility to provide funding, have recently invested only £3.5 million across the whole of England and Wales, and we're yet to find out what share will be coming to London. As part of the MOU, there is a commitment to working together to develop a whole systems approach with the Justice Secretary. We think this should include looking at opportunities for financial devolution to empower London to deliver this. The MOPAC and the MOJ and wider partners are working towards developing a blueprint for responding to female offending in London. Of course, I'll make sure the committee is involved in that work as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of follow-up questions, and thank you for your response to the report as well. During our investigation, we heard about the development of a pilot project to help divert women from the criminal justice system. I think you just said £500,000 was going into that. The Police and Crime Plan published in March last year said this was something you were going to do, and it was planned for summer 2018. And then in your response to our report, you said it would start later this year. And then the Met's response to the report said it would start in early 2019. So can you confirm and make it clear when the pilot will actually start, and say why there's been such a delay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more conspiracy, more cock-up than conspiracy. The delay was with the MOU being agreed with the MOJ. I think the current Justice Secretary has been very good, David Gork, in meeting with us, getting its officials to move fast. The MOU is now done. The way the financial year works means we couldn't do it in the year we'd like to do it. We're going to go as quickly as we can. And again, we'll work with you to make sure you're updated with developments and stuff. But there's no conspiracy or reason for the delay, except for the delay in the MOU and making sure we can spend the money in the right time as soon as we can.
And do you have a date for the pilot to start then?
Chair, I can contact you. I'll get my office to contact you about when we think it'll start.
Okay, great. You also talked about Holloway Prison closing. That was in November 2015, and the site has been completely empty since. It still hasn't been sold, but the prison minister says it will be sold at the end of 2018 now. Realistically, though, that's still probably years before the site is actually starting development. Campaigners have called for a women's centre to be included in the new plans, but given your support for meanwhile use, will you try and negotiate with the Ministry of Justice to open the visitor building that's sitting outside of the prison walls on the Holloway site for the community to use as a women's centre during this period while we're waiting for development to start?
I think what I'd say is what we want is the government to start investing now in services for women and not wait for the site to be sold off, because they know it's going to be sold off and then they'll make the money back. So
yeah, no, I'm talking about right now, that building's just
my money
empty.
There's no reason why the government can't reinvest Holloway Prison proceeds now. Number two, the council, as part of its development brief, includes the possibility of women's centre being there, including affordable housing. As far as meanwhile use is concerned, it's really an issue for the council to look into with anybody who wants to use the visit centres for meanwhile use. My only concern would be is history tells us that meanwhile use can become blurry in relation to when people will leave, but also I want that to be at the expense of a permanent presence of a visitor centre or treatment or women's centre in London. And what I'd rather do is lobby for investment in permanent facilities in London, rather than the meanwhile use being used as an excuse not to invest in the provision of services for women who need it.
No, I agree. Will you discuss that with the Ministry of Justice and maybe convene the council and the ministry to see what can be done just in the meantime?
Chair, what I'm happy to do is speak to the Assembly member for the area and the council about what they think. So I always think the best thing to do is speak to those on the ground. I'm happy to speak to the Assembly member and the council about that.
Okay,
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. The next question is withdrawn, and we go on to Assembly Member Arnold's question on London's science, technology and maths education.
Thank you, Chair. I'm incredibly proud of London's leading position in science and technology. London is home to international research institutes, global tech giants, thriving startups, and boasts some of the highest-ranking universities in the world. I am concerned by the government's handling of Brexit. Innovation within science and tech relies hugely on international collaboration. It's essential that more young Londoners have the skills and aspirations to secure STEM jobs. Although we outperform the rest of the country, over half of the students in London still leave education without a good maths GCSE. We know that many face barriers to entering STEM careers. Just 14% of the UK STEM workforce are women. This is a shocking waste of talent, when we know girls are good at STEM, outperforming boys at school in these subjects. In tech, just 15% of workers are from BAME backgrounds. This doesn't reflect the demographics of the UK and certainly doesn't reflect London. This underrepresentation means there is a huge untapped potential. Our London Scientists programme provides funding to support 5,000 school children from underrepresented backgrounds to gain the Crest Award, the top national accreditation scheme for school STEM projects. We're due to launch £71 million European Social Fund programme, which will include a major project to support unemployed young people in STEM careers. This adds to the £40 million we're investing through the Digital Talent Programme and our Construction Academy. It's important that all children get to develop STEM skills early. However, research shows that STEM toys are 3 times more likely to be advertised to boys than girls. Gender stereotyping like this is unacceptable as it narrows children's options from the very beginning. Deputy Mayor Joanne McCartney and I are holding an equal pay event on the 29th of October to explore what gender equality means for children. Toy manufacturers, retailers, government charities and educators will come together to tackle cross-sector challenges.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and you've been lobbied a lot on this, so thank you for that really full answer. But I just want to just ask you to focus on the educators, and if I use the phrase E27 nationals, and really the support they are going to need in order to navigate one of the most complex administrative eligibility minefields that they will have to face. And if I can say, with the less than efficient Home Office in charge of it. So would you agree with me that the support that you're giving, a great deal of that will have to be targeted at this group, given that without them, without these teachers, without these passionate, committed teachers, then we will just be stepping backwards.
Absolutely right. I mean, just to reassure you, because you're right to remind me of this, one of the big pieces of work that Joanne McCartney is doing is in relation to the work with the people you're talking about, the various campaigns from the Teach London Project, other work I'm doing with Tess to encourage, particularly in London, the issue we have with recruitment and retention is a big issue. And we want to make sure that we get the educators in the right places. A lot of this is not simply using the internet signpost, but face-to-face stuff as well, and giving that sense of confidence is really important.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next question has been withdrawn, and we have Assembly Member Desai's question on modern-day slavery.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this timely question in the week of Anti-Slavery Day, which took place yesterday. And thank you, Assembly Member Desai, for your continued work to raise awareness of this important issue. Modern slavery and the trafficking of people are truly appalling crimes. These crimes have no place in our city or anywhere else in the world. The Met Police takes a central role in tackling modern slavery, building on the excellent work started by the previous Commissioner, Lord Hogan Howe, and continued by Commissioner Sadiq. Officers work in the capital, nationally and even internationally, to tackle the organised criminal networks so often behind trafficking and slavery. The Met also has a key role in providing support for victims. The dedicated Modern Slavery and Kidnap Unit deals with all referrals of modern slavery through the National Referral Mechanism, working closely with the voluntary and community sector to identify the appropriate support for victims. Delivering on a commitment in my police and crime plan, we're bringing partners together to look at how we can work collectively by sharing intelligence and best practice, developing whole system approaches and pooling resources to target our response. Accordingly, the London Modern Slavery Partnership Board was established in June 2017 and meets quarterly, commissioning work focused on improving the identification of victims and the provision of support to them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 questions. And thank you again for all the work you've done in this area, and also for supporting my budgetary proposals to do work in this area. Yesterday was Anti-Slavery Awareness Day. Do you think the insecure immigration status of some, indeed many victims of modern-day slavery, is having an impact on the confidence to come forward and report offences? This is an area that you and your Deputy Mayor have spoken about, and indeed my group actually produced a report with the subtitle, Giving Everyone the Confidence and Safety to Report Offences. So can you give me your thoughts on the whole issue of immigration and the confidence or lack of it of victims with irregular immigration status to come forward?
I mean, as a combination of the representations you've made, Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden, but also the Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman, have done some work on this. There's a real concern that the hostile environment means that victims who have not got secured immigration status here will be scared to come forward for fear of being reported and then deported from the UK. So earlier this year, I wrote to the Home Secretary asking for a number of changes to current processes to ensure that all victims of abuse have the confidence to report a crime and their abusers to the relevant authorities so that justice can be done. And we continue to keep an eye on this. The Met understand the duties upon them, and there are duties upon them in relation to what happens when there's somebody with unsecured immigration status. We're going to make sure people aren't deterred from coming forward because of the concerns they have about the hostile environment causing adverse consequences to them.
Indeed. Just moving on, in terms of the Brexit debate, what would the impact of the loss of European databases have on the ability to prevent and prosecute trafficking across European borders?
It's a huge source of concern. If you speak to the experts, whether it's the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner, others involved in this area, they will tell you that the work we do with European partners is hugely beneficial, not just in terms of tackling modern slavery, but other areas of crime as well. And the short answer is it will lead to things becoming slower, more cumbersome, more burdensome, more expensive, and would unravel the legal framework of cooperation we had. And it's a gift for traffickers, it's a gift for criminals. And you can bet your bottom dollar they're hoping for no deal. They're hoping for an extreme hard Brexit. So the police experts here don't work as collegially with police experts across the EU.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, it was Archbishop of Westminster, I think, yes, who last year described modern slavery in the capital as the dark underbelly of London society. And I'm glad that there's an awareness now developing very rapidly about this serious issue, not just in London, across the country. And the Cooperative Party in particular has done a lot of work and produced a charter on modern slavery. Number of councils in London and around the country, indeed some conservative councils as well, actually adopted the charter. And in my constituency, all 4 of my councils, City of London, Tower Hamlets, Newham, Barking Dagenham, have adopted the charter. Would you encourage other London authorities that have not adopted the charter as yet to do so?
Chair, why don't I agree to get the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime to write to all councils and maybe London councils as well to bring this to their attention. Because actually one of the things you talk about is county lines, and county lines actually is sometimes modern slavery. It's child grooming and child exploitation, where young children from London are being exploited. So it affects every part of our city. So if that's agreeable to the Chair, I'll make sure the Deputy Mayor writes to all the councils, bring this to their attention.
Thank you, sir.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Mayor, I just want to pick up on county lines. As you'll know, in April, the Met did a very good piece of work, and gang leaders from London were prosecuted and we got convictions using modern-day slavery laws. Is there anything else that you think that you can do to encourage them to see this as the new norm? And just because of time, could I quickly add another question onto that? Because as we know, county lines for London is a very, very big deal. 39% of all county lines crimes nationally are coming out of London. And I wonder what else your office can do to encourage the Met to pursue this line. So, for instance, have they looked at recording addresses? So when an offence is recorded in one of the surrounding counties and a London address is involved, are the Met collecting that data to understand how the county lines are spreading across the country?
Well, one of the things, Chair, that we were able to work with the London Crime Prevention Fund to do is to make sure some of the monies from the London Crime Prevention Fund was used on county lines, which is really important, bearing in mind some of the challenges there are in our city and across our country. But also the good news is that the Met Police are the lead when it comes to the national work in relation to county lines. It's not simply London exporting some children who are being exploited to other parts of the country. Liverpool, Manchester and other great cities have a similar problem. And when you go to rural parts of our country, they've seen some of the consequences of county lines. These are children aged from 9, 10, 11, 12, going up to adulthood and stuff. And so there are things we're doing working together. The National Crime Agency is doing some work in relation to this, and the Serious Violent Crime Task Force, chaired by the Home Secretary, has also looked into the issue of county lines. It's an issue that affects everybody. No part of the country is not affected by this.
Okay. Thank you very much. Will the Assembly now please agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Thank you very much. And we now go to question from Assembly Member McCartney relating to rape and sexual assault survivors.
In the Police and Crime Plan and Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, we committed to ensuring that survivors of rape and sexual violence are supported to come forward and report to the police. While the number of rape and sexual offences reported to the police forces increased to 54,000 in the past year, we know that many of these offences still go unreported. For survivors to report these crimes, they must be confident that the police and prosecutors will follow disclosure guidance diligently and will only access information that is reasonable and proportionate to their inquiries. Over the last year, the Victims Commissioner Claire Waxman and I have constantly highlighted our concerns regarding disclosure and the impact it's having on survivors. You'll have seen just this week Claire Waxman has written to the Information Commissioner's office warning that the mass gathering of data from possible rape victims risks preventing them coming forward. The Met and the CPS have produced a joint London Disclosure Improvement Plan. The Met are required to work to national disclosure guidelines, and the London Plan and must follow reasonable lines of inquiry. Our concern is whether these lines of inquiry are reasonable and proportionate in all cases. In all rape and sexual offences cases, digital devices and communication between the two parties is examined. The Met have been working with the CPS on developing a letter for individuals who reported a rape or sexual offence so they understand why their phones will be examined and what to expect. Survivors and the services that work with them have been told by Met colleagues that the CPS will not be able to make decisions about whether to charge a suspect until any digital materials have been captured and disclosed. As you know, the Attorney General is currently undertaking a review into disclosure which will focus on practice and guidance. The Victims Commissioner has called on the AG to move swiftly and update guidance and operating procedures on the handling of digital media and third-party materials. Victims and survivors of rape and sexual violence must remain a central focus. We will continue to challenge the disclosure process until we're satisfied that victims' rights are being safeguarded whilst ensuring a defendant's right to fair trial.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm very glad that yourself and your Victims Commissioner are taking this extremely seriously and taking it up with government. And I was appalled to hear that survivors are being told that their cases will be dropped unless they give access to details of their lives that often go well beyond the parameters of a reasonable investigation. There is a real danger that will prevent victims and survivors from coming forward. Are you concerned about that too?
I'm concerned, and it goes back to the issue about blaming the victim, holding the victim responsible for the behaviour of the defendant. And we'd be a bit careful about this. I mean, I remember in the previous decades some of the practice that took place in our criminal courts when the victims were women. Helena Kennedy's updated her book, Eve Was Framed, and that gives some examples of what's been happening in the criminal justice system in England and Wales over some time. And my worry is this will deter victims coming forward. Almost as I asked a question previously about the impacts on those without decent immigration status, but even those who are, UK citizens who are the victims of rape or sexual offences may be deterred from coming forward if they're worried about this sort of disclosure taking place.
Thank you. And obviously it's a fundamental right that any material that is found during an investigation that either undermines the prosecution or assists the defence is disclosed. But there is a danger with unfettered access that victims are prevented from proceeding with cases, and Assistant Commissioner Hewitt has called for a new system of disclosure, a new national system. And I understand that different police forces have different disclosure requirements. The Met is one of the most intrusive. Would you support the calls for a national system of disclosure?
Well, can I just thank you for the way you asked your question, which is to remind us that we have obligation on the defendant to make sure that he or she receives a fair trial, and disclosure has a proper purpose. I think what's important is for the Attorney General to swiftly update the guidance and operating procedures on the handling of digital media and third-party materials. It's really important we get the practice right and then it's applied uniformly across the country. You'll be aware of the adverse publicity caused recently by a couple of trials where there have been concerns around lack of disclosure to the defendant and led to the trial collapsing. No good for anybody, by the way. And so it's really important we get this right, and the sooner this happens, the better.
Thank you. And would it be possible to let us have a copy of your Victims Commissioner's letter?
Happy to do so, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is withdrawn, and we go to the final question, which is from Assembly Member Copley and relates to the Garden Bridge.
Thank you, Chair. I've always said that I'll not commit more of London taxpayers' money to the Garden Bridge, and I've kept that promise, not least by refusing to sign up to the GLA covering the long-term maintenance and operation of the bridge. The Garden Bridge Trust is still winding up its affairs following its decision to end the project. In 2016, the government, through the DfT, agreed to underwrite up to £9 million of the Trust's potential cancellation costs, and the Trust is in discussion with TfL about a request for payment under that agreement. TfL will review that request in the role as the single conduit for public sector funding of the project, but this was a government decision and any payment would come from their contribution to the project. However, I've been clear that I expect to see full transparency from the Trust before any final payment should be made to them against the DfT's underwriting of cancellation costs, and I understand the Trust has agreed to provide such a breakdown.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I think Londoners will be shocked that there's still the potential for a further payment to be made to the Garden Bridge Trust because of the arrangements that were signed up to previously. This is something I've written to you and to Mike Brown, TfL Commissioner, about. And I'm wondering, in light of the fact that, as you will have seen, an eminent QC has given an opinion which says it is likely that the trustees breached their duties, in particular in relation to the conclusion of the construction contract with Boyd. What legal advice, have TfL taken any legal advice about whether this final payment can be withheld?
Well, I understand, I'm aware of you sending the QC's advice to TfL. My understanding is TfL have taken no external advice. They've, of course, got in-house counsel in relation to that. But I know they're considering the advice you've sent to them. I think there is an issue with some redactions, which I'll speak to you directly about. But, of course, if it's the case, that as a consequence of the advice you've sent to TfL, there are other avenues we're exploring. I'm sure they will do so. Just to remind colleagues, we're talking about potentially £9 million that the government's agreed to pay to the trust. So if there is a value for money argument in relation to the money that's still there to be spent with the trust from the government, aside from the other point you make about the £37 million already spent.
And do you know what the time frame is for TfL making this determination?
Well, I think you sent them the advice recently. Looking at your advice, there is a separate issue about the detailed breakdown which TfL have asked for. And by the way, TfL didn't need to do that. The government's £9 million wasn't on condition of the TfL doing the due diligence. It's really important, though, that they do the due diligence. I think they're going through the detailed breakdown from the trust. I'm not sure the exact dates, but I'm happy to get the Commissioner to write to you about that.
Thank you. Yes, that would be good. And you've highlighted that this is Department for Transport money. We on the London Assembly have conducted, some quite very in-depth investigations into this. But in light of the fact that this tranche of money is DfT money, and we need to be looking at the role of the Department for Transport and the government in this. You said previously that you'd support a parliamentary investigation. Would you write to Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, asking her to look into whether they should do an investigation into this?
Well, you'll be aware that the person that we asked to undertake our review was a former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Margaret Hodge. That was her qualification. And that's something like her doing the review. But she's a chair of the Public Accounts Committee, a long-standing chair, and she is a previous chair. I've got no intention of writing to Meg Hillier, although I'm sure she's aware, as a London MP, of some of the concerns you've expressed. But if you were to write to her and copy me in, I'm happy to look into whether me writing as well would add more weight to this. But I think as a London MP, but also non-London MPs will have seen the expenditure on this project. If there are concerns about, not value for money, concerns in relation to procurement and other processes that Parliament would think are worthy of looking into, I would support that.
Well, I probably will write to her, but it would be good to have your support in this, because I think that a select committee could add some serious weight to an investigation into this. I also want to know if you've, in light of the fact that of this QC's opinion that the Garden Bridge trustees may have breached their duties, I think the role of the Charity Commission as regulator comes into play. Have you had any contact with the Charity Commission at all about this and their oversight of the Garden Bridge Trust?
Yeah, my understanding from TfL is that the Charity Commission has been in discussions with the Garden Bridge Trust about the winding up of the charity and the filing of their accounts. My understanding also is that the Commission has now received an initial set of accounts from the Trust, so I think we can rest assured the Charity Commission know all about the Garden Bridge Trust. And if there are any concerns the Charity Commission have, I've got no doubt they'll be looking into the Garden Bridge Trust.
I'm just concerned because, you know, I think well, it seems to me like they've dropped the ball in regard to the Garden Bridge Trust. You know, I'm a trustee of 2 charities, and I think the way that the Garden Bridge Trust have carried on, particularly if as I'm sure you know from their minutes, some of the things that were revealed in there, I think are absolutely extraordinary and do very much call into question the trustees, but also I think the lax oversight by the Charity Commission. Just finally, you mentioned in your initial response the question of, you know, where the money's gone and this line-by-line account, which has been promised by Mervyn Davis, the chair of the trust. Do you have any indication of when that line-by-line account is going to be produced and given to you?
Yeah, my understanding is that the team have been quite clear to the trust that before any final payment is made, they'll want to see a detailed breakdown of how the money was spent. You'll be aware there's already been some publication of the breakdown in relation to some of the other stuff the trust has done. And my understanding is that the trust has agreed, for reasons you'll appreciate, to provide such a breakdown. And so let's wait and see what that breakdown says.
Okay, but we don't know when that's. We don't know when that.
It would need to be before any further payments are made to the trust. So it's in the trust
before
interest.
They make any further payments.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks.
Can I now ask the Assembly to agree the motion set out in the agenda in my name, that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to use the 1st of November 2018 plenary meeting to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor and the Commissioner of Police regarding policing issues in London?
Agreed.
Can I also ask you to agree to hold an additional plenary meeting on the 29th of November at 2 o'clock to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor regarding the draft economic development strategy for London and formally to consider that strategy?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I ask you to note that the next meeting of the Assembly will be the plenary, which takes place at 10 o'clock on Thursday the 1st of November.
Agreed.
There is one item of urgent business, please, which is to note the changes to membership of the Regeneration Committee. Will you agree those changes, please?
Agreed.
I'm reminded to ask you to note that those changes include a change to the chairmanship of that committee. Do you agree that?
Agreed.
Right, thank you very much.